communauté. D'ailleurs, nous avons fait dans l'église haïtienne dimanche dernier et dans fin service là, le pasteur a recommandé haïtiens pour rester la caillou jeudi 5 novembre si vous n'avez pas besoin, sauf si vous avez besoin de travail ou bien vous avez besoin de le faire à l'acheter dans la maquette pour ta sortie. Donc, à ce moment-là, un pile haïtien a suivi le résultat de l'élection avec un pile attention. Dans le cas de côté là, il y a un pile commentaire mon a fait, surtout d'après projection qui gagne pour le résultat qui commence à enregistrer, c'est que Donald Trump remporté un pile État, même si c'est des États qui étaient quand même républicains, nous senti une tension parce que l'élection ça allait compter en pile pour la communauté haïtienne.
Et donc,
c'est un vote qui passe sans incident, encore une fois. Springfield, c'est un petit ville, et ben c'est tout égal, tout le monde qui te vote bonnet. Moi, j'ai eu chance de visiter bureau et côté où j'ai fait l'élection. Quelques semaines à l'avance, côté où plusieurs monde a défilé pour venir voter. Et puis ensuite, il y a un pile de vote dans la ville, il y a assez éparpillé. C'est ça qui fait pas vraiment grand embouteillage et pas vraiment remarquer aucun dispositif de sécurité spécial, à savoir machine, la police ou bien agent de sécurité. Moi, j'ai observé plusieurs monde à rentrer, sortir, sans pas prendre pile de temps. Donc, c'est une élection qui déroule à Springfield sans incident, mais pour la communauté haïtienne, pendant votre choix compter là, il faut toujours être sous pingaille parce que un peu le monde pensait, selon le résultat à tomber, capable de gagner des ordres ou bien haïtien capable d'une situation qui est plus fragile.
Donc, c'était Gary Altidore et Glorious Nelson. Est-ce que qu'on a nous pas rejoindre Sandra parce que moi il y a des changements dans le chiffre capteur on a pas rejoindre Sandra et côté nous connaissons que c'est Sandra qui dans pays d'Adi capteur météo maintenant c'est lui qui a regardé quatre là pour nous qui a dit nous qui j'en sais parce que ça pile suspense pas bon ici dans occasion journée spéciale ça journée 5 novembre ça nous dans pile temps on attend une journée ça mais finalement journée arrivée donc son journée manche longue et en soirée manche longue et puis c'est la tradition c'est la culture même électorale du pays que eh ben depuis la soirée ça c'est toujours les soirées qui longues et Sandra a pile expérience dans ça qui couvre pile élection donc et comme ça va dire donc Sandra banon mise à jour dernière nouvelle sur qui Jean et ça tombe.
Eh bien, nous capables voir là que Donald Trump prend une autre voie électorale, 178, et Kamala Harris pas changé du tout. Il était à 99, mais j'en ai tendu gagner un pile bureau de vote qui beaucoup fait même, on y a voté toujours. Nous capables de dire nous que t'es quelques incidents et dans l'État Georgie, côté que tu gagné des menaces à la bombe, FBI fait connaître que c'est la Russie qui derrière menace à la bombe, ça y est, ça c'est la cause que tu es obligé de camper l'élection et pendant un moment jusqu'à ce que tu vérifié que vraiment vrai pas de game bombe et pas de vraiment game bombe aucun côté que menacé que tu gagné, mais ça c'est la cause élection pas déroulé normalement dans l'État Georgie. Donc, vous capable de Georgie situé là, nous pouvons gagner un résultat Georgie. Caroline du Nord, c'est un autre État clé. Nous pouvons gagner un résultat Caroline du Nord. Et nous pouvons gagner Virginie, Pennsylvanie, c'est un État que vous considérez comme un champ de bataille. Nous pouvons gagner un résultat là. Michigan, c'est là que ville de Detroit est. Ici, dans nord les États-Unis, et là, gagné un pile électeur et musulman, un pile électeur arabe, un pile qui c'est partisan palestinien, la guerre israélo-arabe, et Mounsa était très fâché avec le président Biden, il dit que il bail Israël propre et il n'a pas fait assez pour suspendre et conflit qui visait femmes Timoun qui mourit pas ban pas paquet et en Israël. Mais donc, pour qu'on y ait, on connaît voir, faut que moi rappelle nous, très conservateur, dans la façon que lui décide qui remportait la victoire dans un État, c'est direction qui décidait, et puis, l'œil décidé, il paraît sous 4 noirs. Donc, moi, connais que nous-mêmes, cap garder la caille, nous, qui pas vraiment comprendre qui genre que élection déroulée ici, il semblait que Trump presque gagnait élection, mais m'a rappelé nous, si nous faisons rejoindre nous, que nous gagnons 6 différentes zones et ici, c'est aux États-Unis, gagnent toute côte ouest les États-Unis, côté qui gagne État qui gagne en pile population, qui gagne en pile voix électorale, qui eux même yo toujours à voter bureau de vote pour qu'on ferme. Donc, nous pas obligé de attendre jusqu'à ce que et bureau de vote ça yo fermé pour qu'on ait vraiment vrai qui est-ce qui gagne qui État. Et puis, m'a rappelé nous tout que aux États-Unis a gagné vote populaire et gagné voix électorale. Voix électorale décide qui est ce président, mais gagné tout vote populaire et c'est pas nécessairement monde qui gagne vote populaire qui a président. Il est possible que monde qui gagne un vote populaire et pas remporter présidence et j'en sais qu'on fait déjà aux États-Unis.
Et ça a déjà arrivé dans l'histoire plusieurs fois que nous cas par exemple Hillary Clinton a remporté le vote populaire mais il n'est pas président pour ça. Donc c'est comme ça culture électorale américaine comme tu as dit nous c'est suffrage indirect que lié. Donc c'est grand électeur qui définit qui monde qui remporte la victoire et suspense a continué 99 pour Kamala Harris et 178 pour Donald Trump. On a rappelé au besoin 270 grands électeurs pour capable remporter l'élection. Donc, on a quitté Sandra pour un petit moment, on a retourné avec encore parce que à mesure que le chiffre a passé, nous-mêmes, on a partagé l'information ça avant. Quand on a Cavalier Paul Cameron avec, c'est Jean-Robert et Philippe, Jean-Robert Philippe, nous avons l'autre côté pour nous aller encore. Et Jean-Robert, avant d'aller rejoindre l'autre monde, nous avons la parole parce que question grand électeur sont bagages qui dominent l'actualité. Surtout, il y a des gens qui même reprochent les États-Unis du fait que y a un système qu'on va jouer de tous côtés. Et c'est ça qui fait que nous faisons un pile effort au niveau de VOA Créole pour nous capables d'expliquer ça crée les votes populaires, ça crée les grands électeurs, qui gère compte les grands électeurs, qui genre que ils décidé ça et qui a un rapport avec le Congrès à Jean-Robert Philippe.
Alors, il y a un peu, j'en dis, et dans la période électorale, c'est surtout, et même américains en général, c'est pas tout américain, non, d'accord avec elle, parce que le fait que pour ça que nous-mêmes, peuple, là, le président directement, plutôt, que pour nous passer par l'élection deuxième degré, pour nous battre nos mandats dans le niveau État noir, pour la représenter, nous, pour la voter en faveur de candidat. Mais les grands électeurs, et Jacqueline, j'en dis, c'est de notables, donc à dire dans État. Mais c'est des notables que d'abord Parti démocrate et Parti républicain, yo sélectionné, c'est avec un pile précaution de sélectionner mon ça, parce que pas time que mon arrive plus devant, parce que rien doit finir choisir, et puis là, il côté pour voter ou pas voter en faveur, et parti qui est bon mandat, ou bien population qui est bon mandat, voter pour adversaire.
Comme quand le président en vote qu'il allait dans le moment ça, le président rencontre dans la Maison Blanche ou le président qui dit qu'il gagne, il réunit avec pour sûr que vraiment pour confirmer votre là.
Ça arrive dans le passé, il y a des gens qui étaient supposés voter pour tel président et puis les arrivés dans la réalité à voter pour l'autre là. Donc si on sait de coups de banane, il pas pour un coup de ça. Donc c'est de notable. En général, c'est des anciens gouverneurs par exemple, mais il n'y a pas qu'un membre actif congrès. Il n'y a pas qu'un membre actif, que ce soit sénateur ou bien député, il n'y a pas qu'un membre actif. Mais c'est des notables, des capitaux anciens députés, des capitaux anciens gouverneurs et d'autres membres de la société civile là que choisissent pour le faire de voir ça. En général, les grands électeurs là, après l'élection finie, nous appelons les gens sans date à expliquer, et population ou électeurs normal, ils ont voté dans le niveau État, avec dans l'esprit qui candidat qui a voté pour lui, Et vote ça, juste son sorte de mandat, yo bay représentant yo et des gens qui parlent voter. Vote ça en général fait pratiquement deuxième semaine, année ça, la fête le 15 ou le 17 décembre, c'est vote ça que délégués par réunir dans chaque parlement, dans chaque parlement niveau État, pour recertifier que dans le niveau État, ça, c'est effectivement un tel ou X, Parti républicain, Parti démocrate, c'est l'un qui effectivement l'élection. Mais on va que nous n'avons pas déjà peut-être que en pile, nous concentrons en pile sur le présidence, mais nous oublions l'autre poumon, bien l'autre deux pieds, ou bien l'autre zèle qui est le système démocratique américain dans le parole du Congrès. Il y a une bataille là tout dans le Congrès pour connaître est-ce que population, parce que rappelez, là c'est pas votre indirect, son vote direct lié population, ils ont voté là, ils ont voté qui est-ce qui m'a voté à représenter Washington dans le Congrès pour venir défendre intérêt. Président qui doit là, président pas qu'à diriger son Congrès. Président Congrès doit avoir un paquet de projets, il ça te mené ou bien te promettre électeurs pendant la campagne, tout côté le passé promettre toute belle bagaille. Mais s'il pas de support Congrès, mais projet ça, tout projet ça a tombé dans l'eau. Donc, on y a une lutte là, on y a en démocratie avec les républicains pour connaître est-ce que population la première mettre chambre député à bail député qui contrôle le Konya ou bien est-ce qu'après mettre Sénat bail républicain. Donc, on lutte là pour dire et j'en prédiction au fait l'État assemblée en général les peuples là bail ils ont parti et la Maison Blanche eh bien ils diviser dévoyer un tiers et ça n'est balance des pouvoirs ou bien encore équilibre des pouvoirs ils diviser et ils bail congrès ou bien chambre député pour une partie et ben l'autre partie à Sénat. Donc les bail là comme ça c'est très difficile pour exécutif là passer projet mais on connaît des fois par exemple les présidents qui connaissent les présidents gagnent ni Sénat non même ni députés participent à la dans Maison Blanche, ni dans Sénat et ni dans Congrès. Et bien c'est deux meilleurs parce que tout projet que depuis le voyer yo passé tant pour on l'état la poste.
Sans difficulté dans l'élection mi-mandat tout peuple a qu'on changer.
Qu'on changer qu'on fait le comme ça là puis dans mi-mandat 2 ans plus tard, je dis yo changer et yo repasser dans l'autre encore. Mais c'est la démocratie américaine. Et pendant des décennies, plus que le siècle, il marchait comme ça dans le système et ça ne l'équilibre pouvoir qui j'en peuple là lui-même, dit qui m'en a brûlé là et qui m'en a brûlé. Mais c'est des bails qui fait qu'on pas même comprendre même qui t'a fait comme ça et il fait comme ça. Donc on a regardé bon Sanders se dit non là bon et bah là bon pas plus le monde comprendre que t'as bien un peu difficulté à l'autorité prendre des dispositions parce que connaît que t'as bien problème dans le niveau de sécurité, t'as bien des ordres même etc. Et c'est ça qui fait que deux partis, surtout républicains, ils ont mis en place déjà équipe légale pour si tu as un problème plus grand aller en tribunal résoudre, mais ça semble que la nouvelle que nous lisons, c'est-à-dire que il y a un petit problème, mais c'est tellement mineur, pas tellement dérangé, tu as dit tout à l'heure, et il y a un côté ouvert en retard, et menace, et c'est là qui cause que votre là te font cap en côté, mais quand même, il n'est pas suffi pour déranger pour ces victoires-là. Et tout bas, jusqu'à présent, nous pas attendu gros des autres qui étaient préparés, qui étaient déjà en disposition. Et bon, heureusement. Mais il y a des gens qui comprennent que nous devons attendre une semaine avant de résultat d'élection. Si le cas d'élection, le résultat d'élection est décidé en tribunal, mais il ne pas semble que les gens vont aller là et vais faire prédiction.
Donc, Jean-Robert Philippe,
c'est mon regard.
Jean-Robert Philippe, nous pour nous retourner avec Jean-Robert Philippe encore parce que Jean-Robert Philippe nous a trouvé là et la Maison Blanche aujourd'hui parce que nous avons plusieurs collaborateurs qui étaient plusieurs côtés et gagné Valérie Saint-Louis qui était avec là, qui était lui-même dans Howard University, son université noire et c'est là que Kamala Harris, vice-présidente et candidat pour parti démocrate là, même c'est là à l'école et c'est lui qui et quartier général et normalement tu as supposé prendre la parole à Soya l'autre bois. Mais quand nous allons rejoindre Yumi Janet qui lui-même trouvé dans Atlanta, Georgia, lui-même qui va dire nous qui j'en sais Yumi qui j'en sais bois la caillou qui j'en sais dans Atlanta, Georgia.
Bonsoir Jacqueline, bonsoir toute la plateforme VAQL là avec tous les téléspectateurs internationaux. Bon, moi, Georgia, que nous connaissons, côté une communauté haïtienne en plein bon qui a grandi et qui représentait en pile dans l'élection depuis l'élection qui passée. Toujours je dis et dans Kaoni côté MDA qui c'était Henry Kaoni pas de gros problème parce que nous avons pas bien qui était passé de grave mais seulement il y a vraiment acteur qui a annoncé dans et dit Kaoni avec Fulton Kaoni et puis connaître il y a une menace bombe et bien il y a plus sécurité qui permet dans la zone et Henry Kaoni et puis mon vote. Mais après ça, Jean que les shérifs dans Henry qui fait connaître, c'était une menace et qui, Jean dit là, c'était là aussi et qui pas de bagaille qui était vrai. Et après, ça a fait que non plus, une douzaine de bureaux dans tous les trois Kaoni, du Cap Kaoni, et avec Fulton et puis Gwinnett, qui gagné 12 bureaux qui étaient retardés, qui étaient obligés de faire même momentanément. Et puis après, nous étions venus ouvrir les qui connaissent que c'était une fausse alerte. Mais la communauté haïtienne, pour nous-mêmes, nous connaissons, et c'est la focus nous payer. Et nous avons une motivation extraordinaire dans notre communauté haïtienne, côté que nous fait sitting, nous avons motivé les Haïtiens qui dans l'État pour que nous puissions voter. Et je dis pour quelques gens que nous avons rencontrés, nous avons voté depuis et early voting. Nous avons voté, nous fait qu'on est que l'importance de vote, c'est juste pour capable aider notre Haïtien qui est dans une situation irrégulière dans le pays. Nous avons nous focus en pile sur l'immigration parce que nous connaissons en pile famille qui entrent ici, surtout après déclaration, il y a un candidat au fait, et bien, nous qui mettons tête ensemble pour nous voter, nous sommes capables d'aider la communauté haïtienne qui dit qu'a passé un moment de turbulence par rapport avec toute déclaration qu'a faite sur la communauté haïtienne. Mais après ça, pas de trop gros bagages que nous sommes capables de retenir, mais ça nous connaît que Georgia, c'est un state, un battleground state, ça veut dire que c'est ça, c'est un state pour gagner la donne, c'est pas pour un grand écart qu'à le faire président et candidat à le gagner, mais c'est un état qui est très serré, nous avons dit, dans la course électorale. Jusqu'à maintenant, nous avons suivi tous les médias locaux pour nous capables de connaître qui s'est passé et pour nous capables d'inquiéter et tout auditoire de la nous informe. Jacqueline.
Ok, merci. Avec nous depuis Atlanta, Georgia. Merci pour toute l'information. Et nous connaissons que on a bien et l'autre information qui tombe encore, on a toujours partagé avec les amis téléspectateurs internautes. Et n'importe où, Jean-Robert était dans Grand Lac, nous dit, Jean-Robert était dans la Maison Blanche. Jean-Robert, il parle en pile de sécurité, surtout dans cette zone névralgique, par exemple, la Maison Blanche, Congrès et l'autre côté. Qui j'ai en sécurité à dans la Maison Blanche?
Bon, compte tenu de l'expérience passée, nous refaisons toujours avec 4 ans de cela, ça qui était passé, etc. Donc, l'autorité était pris des mesures, par exemple. Pour dernier frontal dans la maison, ça, moi, je dis à Mbatomoy. Ils ont ouvert périmètre sécurité, ouvert, et conseil de gros barrières, mettez capable peut-être 10 pieds de hauteur, et peut-être un petit peu beaucoup plus haut. Et qu'ils ont fermé toute zone net, côté mon habitude à visiter la Maison Blanche, même si je ne suis pas entré dans au moins dehors, devant la Maison Blanche, ou faire photo, etc. Et on ne sait pratiquement pas de chance ça. Et ils ont quitté seulement 2 ou 3 portes ouvertes qui viennent d'avoir accès un petit peu beaucoup plus près de Maison Blanche. Et après ça, c'est nous-mêmes peut-être une addition, mais l'arrivée, quand on apparaît depuis dans rue H ou bien rue qui passait devant Maison Blanche, qui passait devant Pennsylvanie, etc. Et bien depuis là, on senti que zone vient nous zone stérile, le côté mesures de sécurité augmenté, parce que quand on dit mon autorité en général, et Jacques n'a pas prendre aucune chance. Il va avoir aucune chance avec le problème de sécurité, donc il a augmenté le périmètre là. Et très certainement, mon autorité là, bon, très certainement, un groupe et très certainement, c'est quand mon protestant qui t'a prêché, mais très loin de la maison, de Maison Blanche en lui-même. Mais non, grand périmètre qui est juste en dehors. Donc, son lot, et puis, était complètement absuivi, ou était encore et sécurité, secret service, parce que moi, pas mon avec zam dans mais moi, connais les zam. Moi, pas mon nom, même connais mon cap suivi. Et non seulement surveillance, des capables physiques, des capables électroniques. Donc, ça veut dire qu'il n'y a pas de chance qui dépend du tout dans le niveau ça. Et c'était vraiment une sécurité. C'est là que la presse, par exemple, pas de bien au bureau de vote, mais journalistes, médias internationaux, et y compris la Voix d'Amérique, eh bien, nous tous, nous sommes capables d'entrer dans la cour, dans l'ouest, partie ouest, à côté médias, à côté nous, nous tout bagaille, et bien, c'est là que tout journaliste est capable de camper pour une nouvelle, pour te dire téléspectateurs ou bien auditeurs, quand ça a regardé là, et bien, là, il y a un nouveau locataire là-dedans.
Okay.
Et nouveau locataire capable, vice-président Kamala Harris, ou comme tout capable, ancien président Donald Trump. De toute façon, Janvier et Jacqueline,
Abgo
nouveau locataire. Mais nouveau locataire. Et c'est ça que caméraman et journalistes, et ça devine côté. Jusqu'à présent, M. Sayo, pratiquement, ils ont créé la permanence justement pour ouais, est-ce que capable de résultat pendant là, était seulement ouais, un bagage quand même. Mais quand même, il était un engouement vraiment.
En parlant de résultats, on a rappelé Mounio qu'on sauvé à Créole. Nous-mêmes, c'est la grande soirée. Après, on journée longue, qu'on a une soirée longue, côté que, eh bien, nous vivons un moment qui est extraordinaire. C'est une page l'histoire qu'a écrit et dans la ville des États-Unis, côté que, eh bien, il y a une élection qui déroule aujourd'hui. Nous parlons de Sandra Lemaire. Sandra Lemaire, c'est le cap. J'ai suspense pour nous pas voir ici. Sandra, il y a un nouveau chiffre qui tombe.
Il y a un nouveau chiffre qui tombe. J'en ai capable de voir. Et Donald Trump fournit en 188 et voix électorale. Il fait remporter la victoire dans l'État Missouri. L'État Missouri, nous connaît le centre-ouest des États-Unis traditionnellement. C'est qu'on nous État qui vote républicain, j'en nous ça. Et si nous regardons 4 ça, nous avons et dernière fois il a voté démocrate, c'était en 1996. Donc Missouri, il fait ajouter 10 voix électorales et pour mettre Trump à 188 et Kamala Harris pas changé du tout, il est toujours en 99 voix électorales et n'a rappelé encore une fois que il y a un bureau de vote qui est toujours ouvert, qui peut fermer et Glorieuse dit nous c'est à 9h seulement que il y a quelques bureaux de vote qui étaient fermés. New York, mais nous connaissons que il prédit que Kamala Harris va remporter New York, donc il pas vraiment affecté chiffre ça yo, mais parmi les États que un peu le monde attend résultat et pour qui ça va l'affecter bagaille et qui est capable vraiment enfin il va jouer un rôle clé dans le résultat élection ça gagné Georgie ils mis fait que tu as parlé nous de État Georgie nous dit nous que tu gagné plusieurs et menaces à la bombe qui étaient faites et que FBI dit c'est la Russie qui fait menace ça pour gâter l'élection États-Unis. Il était la cause élection était obligé camper pendant longtemps mais il était reprendre bagaille normalement donc n'a pas de résultat Georgie, Caroline du Nord, gagné Virginie tout, Pennsylvanie nous connaissons un état clé que tous les deux candidats ont remporté la victoire mais Iowa, Minnesota qui c'est état et candidat à la vice-présidence démocrate là Tim Walz, gouverneur Tim Walz et donc et puis tout là nous gagnons Idaho, Oregon, Washington, nous gagnons Californie qui c'est plus gros état qui gagne plus délégués voix électorale qui est disponible, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado qui d'habitude qu'on très même Colorado et puis là c'est Alaska et Alaska lui-même c'est dernier côté qui pourra suspendre voter et on pourra fin voter à 1h du matin le Washington le open. Jacqueline. Donc nous avons 188 et 90 là.
à nous faire un petit calcul rapide, Sandra, 188 ou besoin de 270 pour remporter l'élection. Donc, si on fait un petit calcul, 12 par rapport à 88, 12 plus 70, ça vaut 82. Donc, ancien président Donald Trump a besoin de 82 grands électeurs pour être capable de remporter l'élection d'après les chiffres qu'il a. Et puis bon, Kamala Harris 99, nous-mêmes on a fait calcul là.
171.
Voilà, 171, nous besoin. Donc, mais qui en situation est, en pile suspense pas bon ici, nous souhaitons que nous sommes capables de notre chiffre avant que nous fassions le programme. Donc, nous-mêmes nous décréter la permanence jeudi à son longue soirée, une longue journée, mais nous pas plein, parce que ça fait partie de métier nous, et nous faisons tout chaque 4 ans, et oui. VOA Créole, et chaque temps appel publié, et
ça.
Oui, et dans mandat ça, nous venons avec l'autre bagage, que nous venons avec l'autre bagage encore, et nous rappelons que, et je ne sais pas si là, si il est toujours là, nous rejoindre Luxon, je ne connais Luxon, et Luxon a un problème avec Luxon Jean-Aubert, et Luxon c'est une ville trouvée dans Floride, et Floride très important, parce que c'est là que l'ancien président Donald Trump, c'est là le tabli quartier général, il a parlé de Mar-a-Lago, il était voté aujourd'hui, tant qu'on te dit déjà, dans Palm Beach, mais nous allons rejoindre Luxon Saint-Ville, qui trouvait des restaurants haïtiens. Donc, monsieur, bien localisé.
Alors, nous saluons Jacqueline, nous saluons Jean-Pierre, si nous recevons mieux par rapport à tout à l'heure. Ok, là, je me dis là, moi, on est un restaurant haïtien, côté de Watch for the qui t'a organisé, et on est capable de lire dans le visage déception, bien plus de perception abattue, si vous avez utilisé mon frère, c'est ça. Par rapport avec le candidat républicain lui-même après qualité. Ici, à la Florida, il y a déjà projeté que Donald Trump lui-même lui a reporté ça, jusqu'à 9 heures comme ça. Donald Trump a déjà recueilli 56,1% voyons, et Kamala Harris c'est de 42,9%. Donc, tout ça, c'est question au total 88% de l'unité qui a été comptée. Donc, si Florida lui gagnait plus de 8,1 millions de qui votaient là-dedans pour représenter 58% de l'électeurs enregistrés. Et quand on dit le chiffre disponible, il montre que gagnait plus républicains qui votaient dans l'élection. Et j'aime ça tout à l'heure, la première intervention, qui donne ça, la première là, dans plusieurs espaces ici dans le Floride. Donc, on a gagné dans Miami, dans Miami, et de retour les zones West Palm Beach, même si zone ça, oui, il y a une récitation et tu vois, je peux publier. Donc, tout à l'heure, c'est sans incidence. Et d'abord, de continuer à appliquer comment c'est tombé dans le matériel, c'était ça qui tombe sur place, retarder l'ouverture de vote. Mais ça va pas être que Haïtien était sur route de vote. Avec les Haïtiens parler, ils disent, c'est important pour que cette voter. Non seulement l'élection, ça a été pour avenir, pour bien ça pour dans le pays, pour rentrer dans différents programmes. L'élection, ça, la communauté haïtienne n'a suivi surtout, mais Haïtien pour rentrer dans le programme Biden, le programme Civic One, ou le monde pour être ça peut appeler dans le temps, il menace pour le programme Biden, merci de notre petit pouvoir, il menace pour le taper Civic One, petit pièce, ça fait une pêche, Haïtien pas vivre. Dans l'état Floride particulièrement, la Sud-Florida, le Miami, c'est tout, que cette bien répété. C'est pourquoi, c'est à Donald Trump qui a remporté l'élection.
Pour toute précision, ça a encore porté pour nous, dans l'occasion, journée ça, journée électorale ça, soirée électorale ça. Faut dire que l'élection, ça a un paquet d'éléments clés qui la donnent, tant qu'on a parlé de politique internationale, politique extérieure. Par exemple, nous connaissons que l'élection, ça a déroulé dans un moment qu'il y a deux gros guerres, guerre la Russie contre l'Ukraine et puis guerre Israël contre Hamas, semblait tout que développement qui gagne dans Israël, et même qui qu'on y a avec Hezbollah dans le sud Liban, donc son bagage qui est compliqué et ça vient dans l'élection. Il y a une question d'avortement tout qui vient dans l'élection et très naturellement, question immigration et question économique. Il y a un spécialiste qui dit que l'élection, elle chita sur économie, en pile fois, Et ça, c'est ça, je dis, c'est que, eh bien, moun qui sont pouvoir, yo demande, est-ce que, yo bon moun gen utiliser, est-ce qu'on better off? Est-ce que,
bon,
est-ce que nous pas plus beau si nous votons l'autre interne encore dans la question économique? Donc, tout ça fait un paquet qui fait de l'élection dans plusieurs débats ou qu'a fait même dans des débats qui te mettaient face à face ancien président Donald Trump avec vice-président Kamala Harris, où est cette question ça qui était venu, qui gens yo même yo t'a traité question. Donc, jusqu'à présent, c'est suspensant et cap continuer. Et tant qu'on nous dit le pas bon ici dans Washington, eh ben c'est Harvard University et Valério pas grand parler de question ça, il dit que dans pile système de sécurité, en pile même genre avec la Maison Blanche.
Même avec la Maison Blanche et bon, Harvard premièrement, c'est qu'on va habitué faire, nouveau pour eux, et deuxièmement c'est un ancien étudiant autour. Donc ça va une sorte de fierté et ça va l'école là pour plus visibilité. Le vice-président qui vient et obligé de dire on partit dans la cour l'école là même pour faire on stand nos côté que pour célébration à fêtement. En général, j'en parle à parler et j'en ai parlé là qu'on y a là. Moi pas qu'à dire rien parce que vraiment nous avons suivi l'élection même à tout le monde. Mais vraiment l'élection a déroulé et plus une inquiétude, peut-être inquiétude qu'on y a capable apparemment à diminuer les gens que yo mité dit non bon la caille parle avec menace de gain yo et on a dit que dans une compter ça au côté que autorité était obligée camper vote là et bien était un juge qui était obligé autoriser que quitter bureau ça ouvrir pour l'autre 2 heures de temps encore mais nous passer par Sandra là parce que
oui nous allons nous comprenons que il y a les bagages qui tombent et nous connaissons que ou même cap suivre dans moment ça et ça fait nous un peu le plaisir est-ce que vous suivre nous te suivre nous dans rendez-vous et qu'on y a et matin dans la groupe gagnant et nous allons jeune Sandra parce que il y a un chiffre qui tombe Sandra
justement donc et nous faisons ajouter 10 points pour Donald Trump il en 498 qu'on y a et état que lui fait remporter c'est Montana qui gagne 4 voix électorales, gentil, merci. Et puis, Kounia Utah. Et Utah qui gagne 6 voix électorales, ça fait 10. 4 et 6 fait 10. Donc, si gentil ouvrir ou capable de que c'est un État qui, pendant 10 dernières années ou plus passé ça, depuis 1992, et État ça pas jamais voté démocrate, il toujours voté républicain, Jean-Luc ça. Et Utah est toujours voté républicain.
Donc, pas de surprise.
Donc, pas de surprise dans le résultat. OK?
Donc, ça veut dire que qu'on y a 98, on n'a pas calculé encore pour le monde qui est devant.
72.
72, voilà.
72
en plus, l'arithmétique a tombé aujourd'hui.
Pas qu'on fait toute bagage pour journaliste, Jacques.
Voilà.
Mathématiques, écrit.
Oui, géographie, politique, histoire, vous capable de faire métier. Et nous comptons faire métier ça, c'est un métier que nous faisons avec beaucoup de plaisir. Et c'est ça que nous ne sommes pas fatigués. Malgré le matin, nous là, et bien, toute équipe là, c'est la permanence et boss nous avec nous. Boss nous soutient nous tous gens, moralement, physiquement, et va nous manger. Ça fait nous plaisir. Et nous avons Jean-Aubert, donc Jean-Aubert lui-même, il a un téléphone. Nous connaissons des fois, nous avons des chiffres, nous avons dit.
Nous avons dit, nous avons nouvelle, nous y a tout. Alors, ça n'a pas de parler de chambre militaire. Alors, nous disons que dans le système électoral américain, pratiquement, chaque 2 ans, tout député a l'élection. Tout 435 députés à l'élection, chaque 2 ans. Et puis, ça fait tout par l'élection du mandat, avec les 2 premières années, les présidents fait compter. Donc, 2 ans plus tard, il y a une élection encore, mais sans président, et pas de gain en 4e année, le président pas fait partie de l'élection. Donc, tout député renouvelé, personnel et chambre député, renouvelé chaque 2 ans, et c'est là ça que les résultats, ou bien encore, chambre va passer de au parti à l'autre. Mais Sénat lui-même, Sénat renouvelé chaque 6 ans, mais chaque sénateur a un poste pour 6 ans, mais chaque 2 ans tout, il y a un tiers dans le Sénat qui est censé renouveler tout, et puis ne pas oublier que le gouverneur, le gouvernement local, que nous pas parler de eux, nous connaissons que un pile haïtien, par exemple, dans le niveau de New York, dans Massachusetts, par exemple, qui est candidat pour poste local, mais qui, eux même tout, ils ont puis on parle tout une côté dans ce terre. Donc on y a j'en regardé là qu'on y a saisissement ta ka gagner Jacqueline, saisissement ta ka gagner, on veut puis go saisissement ta ka gagner qu'on y a c'est si électeurs en plus yo ta nous pas fait projection non si yo ta ba républicain au Maison Blanche là et qui possibilité gain pour que même électeur ça encore yo bay république ni maison ni député ni sénat. C'est des scénarios qui sont possibles, mais il y a des calculs qui étaient faits, experts fait des calculs, etc. Il y a dit que capable d'un changement de main. C'est-à-dire un changement de main qui était gagné. Donc, et je dis, c'est démocrates qui contrôlent le Sénat. Eh bien, et il y a peut-être demain, ils viennent contrôler la Chambre des députés. Et puis, les républicains, ils vont contrôler le Sénat. Mais il y a l'autre scénario tout possible. Et Jean-Baptiste a parlé là, bon, il n'y a que d'attendre.
Ok, tant que Sandra se dit, le journaliste faut faire arithmétique, faut faire histoire, qu'on a pas faire histoire, et Sandra, nous parlons de jeune Sandra, c'est pas qu'un chiffre qui tombe, non, mais Sandra va parler nous de chiffres, c'est ça qui est passé, et 4 ans de ça, donc Sandra, et bah nos chiffres encore.
Donc ça c'est, ça n'a regardé là, c'est quantité de voix électorales que Biden s'est remporté dans la dernière élection, en 2020. Donc, nous capables et tout état ça que Trump a déjà remporté, il était remporté en 2020 tout, pas vrai, Floride, Alabama, tout état dans le studio, Iowa, nous pouvons connaître le résultat et pour ça, nous pouvons connaître pour Minnesota, mais nous capable tout état ça que Trump gagné et il était gagné déjà. Pas connaître si Kounia nous déjà connaît le résultat pour Idaho. Donc nous capable voir qui genre que résultat yo tayé semble que rouge gagne en pile état qui rouge mais on connaît que malgré que il a semblé au bagaille et ouais peut-être qu'il y a moins bleu sous quatre que rouge mais vrai jouet là c'est voix électorale chaque candidat remporte. Donc
bah connait si des chiffres qui tombent encore et non c'est même chiffre qu'il a encore toujours même chiffre et ben faut tirer rafraîchir nous Sandra et qui dernier chiffre qui est 99 190 toujours.
Oui, 198 et puis 99 pour Kamala Harris. Nous voyons que le chiffre Kamala Harris n'est pas vraiment changé pendant tant que dernier temps ça y que nous avons parlé. Mais je nous fais ce ouais et là nous comparer avec et Kamala Harris fait ce remporté Colorado. C'est ça que moi j'ai commencé à dire nous que d'habitude et Colorado qu'on voté démocrate et encore une fois je voté démocrate d'habitude état ça qui est situé dans la région ouest des États-Unis l'inamon mais il y a un pile libéral qui a vivre là qui a prend retraite c'est monde qui a un principe libéral pour plus fort malgré que c'est un état qui a un pile beauté il y a un monde comme Haïti. Il y a un pile neige, il y a un pile zone rurale, mais par exemple, Denver, Granville, c'est une ville qui est très libérale. Donc, Kamala Harris fait tout remporter Colorado, mais nous voyons qu'il y a un pile état que nous pouvons connaître qui est-ce qui a remporté la victoire. Donc, l'élection va poursuivre.
Et un petit calcul, nous pouvons faire un petit calcul pour Kamala Harris, il est 270, donc il est 161. 161. Donc, Donald Trump lui-même, il a besoin 72. Donc, chiffre continue à tomber, nous connaissons que l'heure où nous suivre et élection, il y a plusieurs sources, mais nous mettons sources officielles, c'est sources officielles, ça nous 109 à 198. Donc, dans pile suspense qu'a fait dans l'occasion élection élection présidentielle, tant que Jean Robert dit, c'est pas seulement focus qu'a fait sur le président et nous qu'à comprendre ça parce que l'enjeu est beaucoup plus grand parce que président sont l'autre niveau, mais tout gagne l'autre parce que saisi, il y a un gouverneur qui a déjà remporté la victoire, donc dans pile l'autre résultat cap tombé, mais nous-mêmes, nous, on t'y focus sur ça. Bon, l'autre point encore, comme tu as signalé, n'a pas que, tant que Luxon Saint-Ville dit nous, eh bien, dans le restaurant, ça, ils ont organisé, même, fait, côté que ils ont regardé l'élection ensemble. Mais sans pile l'autre communauté qui fait, la communauté arabe la fait, latino fait, ils ont réunis ensemble. Donc, c'est pour dire nous que c'est pas seulement haïtien qui fait, c'est notre tradition, même pays, où on est que États-Unis sont pays qui ont des gens mosaïque, anglais dit melting pot, comme si son côté, où joignent plusieurs tendances, où joignent plusieurs races. Et donc, chaque monde ça yo, communauté ça yo même organisé, qui gens yo même y a géré, qui gens yo même y a géré, qui gens a gardé et élection. Donc, nous-mêmes, la VOA Créole, nous-mêmes, nous venons et soirée à longue pour nous, en pile, et nous connaissons que nous devons porter ça bas. Donc, le point que nous sommes capables de signaler encore, c'est question sécurité, parce que nous-mêmes, la Voix de l'Amérique, nous tout pré-congrès, nous avons toutes les questions sécurité, nous avons tout qui gens, l'autre bureau vote, par exemple, Gentil Augustin Junior, qui était allé matin dans le bureau vote dans Arlington, dans librairie dans Arlington, qui sont bureau de vote, qui gens ça passé, bon processus qui fait avant que finalement, ou déposer et bulletin, son façon pour nous être capable d'avoir une idée de tout qui j'en bas a déroulé.
Alors, il y a des téléspectateurs qui ont aussi ça fait. Lors de notre bureau de vote, la première côté leur paraît, ou identifier tout d'abord. Que ce soit avec un permis de conduire, on va montrer que c'est eux-mêmes, c'est non, que checker non dans la liste électorale là, pour est-ce que non là, ou bien est-ce que c'est dans le bureau ça, ou doit venir voter. Donc, là, on vérifie que c'est là où doit venir voter, qu'on y a bon, petit carte, il y a une sorte de laisser passer. Et à partir de lui-même, qu'on y a l'autre bureau, côté que vous prenez le bon bulletin électoral. Là, il y a bon choix. Il y a est-ce que vous voulez faire voter avec papier, ou bien est-ce que vous voulez faire vote électronique. Dans ce bon affaire ordinateur, plus ou moins, vous pouvez choisir électronique. Si ce n'est pas bon ordinateur, bon, on va prendre un gros feuille papier qui est capable de 2 pages là-dedans, ça dépend de la quantité officielle qui l'a dans l'élection. Donc, on peut le choisir, ou même checker, etc. pour l'offre fini. Que ce soit l'offre fini qu'on y a, ou à l'autre inspecteur lui-même, l'autre superviseur lui-même, et qui pond lui-même non, et ça les bureaux côté pour le bulletin, mais qui est complètement secret, et puis du même côté au besoin voter là, et puis il explique qui j'ai pour mettre bulletin, pour mettre le face en lait, pour que les scanner. Et puis, l'on finit, il dit merci beaucoup, fait de voix, etc. Et puis, l'on finit, il y a un petit bar, justement, pour monter pour ce vote, etc. Pour faire qu'on est content. Dans la c'est électronique, oui. Vous supprenez, mais quand même, ça, oui. Et puis, bon, l'essai électronique en lui-même, il met devant machine en lui-même. Machine, il y a une indication, est-ce que vous voulez faire en anglais, ou bien en espagnol? Donc, vous choisissez ce que vous voulez. Et puis, qu'on y a, on va checker avec main, qu'on y a là, depuis photo, on apparaît. Alors, ça qui va là, dans l'air pour nous, même qui est dans l'élection locale, l'élection au niveau État, ou pas contre tout bagaille, ou pas contre tout, on est un président pour voter pour lui, mais c'est seulement un président qui est au niveau national. Ensuite, qu'on y a au niveau État, ou un député, ou un sénateur, ou un tout juge. Et ou bien tout, c'est de référendum, tout que vous faites. Par exemple, il demande pour autoriser l'État pour prêter l'argent pour aller bâtir l'école, bâtir bibliothèque, construire route, etc. Ou bien doit dire non. Si on dit non, il ne va pas prêter comme là. Donc, c'est de référendum, etc. Et dans la même élection, ça, par exemple, dans l'État, l'État Floride, des questions avortement, questions droit de reproduction, etc., qui semblait, d'après ça, qui dit qu'il n'est pas fait parce qu'il faut gagner 60% voix électeurs. Il y a des parents collectés à 60% voix. Donc, c'est des référendums qui ne pas passer. Référendum, c'est oui ou non. Il ne faut pas réfléchir. C'est là, soit dire oui ou bien non. Pour prêter l'argent, soit dire oui ou bien non. Donc, il y a des débats où pas connaît. Donc, là, ça, comme on est déjà en dedans, au cas voter, oui, au cas voter. Bon, il y a des fois, on penche sur mon monde, ou garde mon nom, on dit, bon, moi, je m'informe comme ça, je voter pour lui. Donc, si vous parlez, puis ça relève writing. Writing, c'est non, par exemple, un candidat qui peut, pour quelque soit raison, qui n'a pas de inscrit. Parce que, pour quelque soit raison, ou même qu'on y a eu une opportunité, ça, on doit écrire non le tout. Parce que, il n'est pas dans la liste là, on doit mettre dans le monde ça. Et bon, il y a d'abord deux candidats, par exemple, qui eux-mêmes, qui pas été inscrits, ou bien pas rempli toutes conditions, mais ils sont candidats quand même, et bien, ils s'ouvrent les mondes ça, et bien, écrit non lui-même, et ils comptent votre ça. Ça, c'est pour le processus qui va là. Ça prend en principe 10 à 15 minutes. Là, fait mais je dis à une nouvelle qui est sortie, il y a un électeur qui Jean Babier dans quelques côtés, parce que l'idée prend plus de temps que prévoir, parce que justement, il était pensé que la tâche fait très rapide, mais il devient des difficultés, etc. Et puis, pour résoudre, il y a plus de monde que tu attends, parce que rappelons que c'est raison que votre avant l'heure et importance votre avant l'heure bien votre pas correspondance là retirer pression qui gagne dans le voiture jouer élection parce qu'on connaît etc. Et nous avons regardé dans une vidéo côté de paquet de monde bureau pas fermé mais on paquet de monde qui en ligne et pour là obligé qui ont quand même une nouveauté pas fermé bureau
voilà. Oui mais Jean-Aubert en parlant de processus là on dit que ici aux États-Unis tout chaque état il y a des côtés qui a des nuances parce que chaque État, c'est pour son autonomie que gagne organiser élection. Mais il y a une instance lui-même qui est quand même à regarder toute bagaille qui Jean a fait. Donc ça veut dire qu'il y a un processus qui fait. Donc jusqu'à présent, et m'a regardé les chiffres là, chiffres pour et pas changer, pas connaître ce que nous toujours donc correspondant nous aller. Donc nous pratiquement ensemble. Donc pratiquement c'est là nous allons mettre fin dans le programme là et c'était un plaisir pour te servir, on va connaître, n'a fait dernier, rejoindre Sandra Lemaire, n'a connaître si il y a quelques chiffres. Peut-être que qu'on a parlé à tout, au chiffre 4 tombé.
Ça arrive.
On a rejoint Sandra et Lemaire qui lui-même a dit, on va ce chiffre là devant nous, et là, on rappelle pour chiffre qui gagne, jusqu'à présent, nous ne pouvons pas connaître qui est-ce qui gagne l'élection présidentielle américaine.
Exactement. Nous ne pouvons pas connaître qui est-ce qui gagne l'élection présidentielle là. Nous connaissons que chiffre clé, c'est 270 voix électorales que le candidat a besoin pour lui remporter présidence des États-Unis. Que lui remporter vote populaire ou pas, ça n'a pas aucune importance parce que c'est chiffre ça qui est plus important dans toute bagaille et au besoin de 270 pour gagner la victoire. Jusqu'à présent, nous voyons que tout le sud là est fin voté, nous voyons Floride, voté pour Trump, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Ohio, qui c'est État J.D. Vance, Indiana, côté que nous avons un pile haïtien qui a là. Et West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, tout État ça traditionnellement dans l'histoire des États-Unis, ils ont toujours voté républicain, donc c'est pas vraiment une surprise. Napton et résultat quelques États dans côte nord-est des États-Unis, quelques parmi eux qui c'est ça est considéré comme État champ de bataille et qui veut dire que républicain capable de gagner yo, démocrate capable de gagner yo, et yo gagne en pile voix électorale, donc yo capable vraiment jouer un rôle clé dans qui est-ce qui remporte la victoire. Parmi yo gagne Pennsylvanie, Virginie, qui tout près Washington, nous pouvons connaître chiffre Washington yo, non plus tout Caroline du Nord, Georgie, qui c'est un état clé. Gagne Wisconsin, Minnesota, qui c'est État Tim Walz, candidat vice-président démocrate, gagne Iowa. Iowa, c'est là que ils ont commencé le processus électoral chaque année. C'est eux-mêmes qui organisent la première élection primaire pour décider qui candidat qui pourra représenter chaque parti. Gagne Kansas, tout Kansas capable voter démocrate, parfois l'école voter républicain. Gagne Arizona, vous connaissez Arizona, New Mexico. C'est État Californie tout qui partageait frontière avec Mexique, pas vrai? Donc pour eux-mêmes, question de immigration, sécurité, c'est des bagages qui sont très importants. Nous gagnons Washington, Oregon, nous connaissons Idaho. Idaho, c'est un État qui très agricole, il y a un pile chantier là, c'est là que il y a un pile, oui, exactement. Et c'est là que nous avons élevé pommes de terre. Gros pommes de terre que nous connaissons qui sont aux États-Unis, c'est dans l'état ça que nous sorti. Donc, moi, connais que nous avons gens frustrants et pour nous, même, et Kamala Harris fait tout remporter l'autre et victoire même. Ah, est-ce que c'est Vermont? Non. Messieurs, DC. C'est Washington. Washington DC, qui toujours vote démocrate, John ça. Et donc, moi, je connais que le processus est capable de petit gens frustrant pour nous, à regarder en Haïti, nous comprendre ça, il y a des Américains qui, ont même tout, ils n'ont pas très bien comprendre le processus là. Mais c'est qu'on s'allie, ça fait partie de la démocratie, hein? Donc, malgré que peut-être n'a clôturé le programme dans Kounye, nous sommes capables d'assurer que, bien entendu, demain, n'a paiera poursuivre avec toute dernière information, ou capable de garder sur le site web, nous, capable de garder sur Facebook, sur YouTube, et c'est
toute notre plateforme que nous gagnons, qui est disponible, pour être capable de toute bonne information sur question élection. Donc, pratiquement, Kamala Harris 112 et puis Donald Trump 198. Tant que Sandra Sodil, on est capable de consulter toute plateforme pour capable de suivre 4 électorales là, et comme ça veut dire 4 élections États-Unis 2024 là pour capable de gagner toute information. Donc, nous pratiquement arrivé dans la fin programme. C'est un programme manche long. Nous comptons de ce que ou même ou pas abandonner ou toujours avec nous. Et à chaque fois que nous gagnons des programmes spéciaux comme ça, et c'est toute équipe là qui était, même était en branle pour être capable de porter programme ça. Imaginez des nègres pour gentil qui, depuis matin au dehors, nègres ça au tal dehors même, gentil aller dans Arlington, toujours bien Arlington là, et gagner Jean-Marc Hervé Abela lui-même qui c'est le producteur là pour paquet de travail au four et au moulin. Et puis, monsieur Fred Kaimit, il va même citer nous, non, général. De monsieur Fred Kaimit, nous allons nous Jersey.
J'ai vu à pied là.
Et puis, nous avons Jean-Robert Philippe, nous toujours dans le service à l'infatigable, qui lui-même était dans. Qui compte Jean-Robert?
Il était dans la Maison Blanche, la Caille Biden.
Faut dire que le président.
Oui, il faut dire le président. Alors, nous continuons à faire avec le président Biden, ensemble avec la première dame. Eh bien, non, je dis, a été choisi, il était dans la Maison Blanche pour suivre les résultats d'élection. Même gens avec téléspectateurs, ils suivent les résultats d'élection, alors que tu as choisi, elle était là. Mais au choisi, il était dans la Maison Blanche, justement, parce qu'on est vice-président Patapla, par l'autre côté. Et bon, ancien président Donald Trump, de bon côté, il y a.
Et puis, nous remercions tout Valerio Saint-Louis qui quittait New York. En parlant de nous. Oui, pour être bon ici, Valerio Saint-Louis qui était avec nous. Et lui-même était là dans le quartier général et pratiquement démocrate en parlant de Kamala Harris, lui-même qui était dans le rendez-vous, nous était capable de aller. Et puis, nous voulons remercier toutes l'autre amis nous, on a parlé de correspondants nous, on a parlé de Yumi Janet depuis Georgia, Atlanta. Nous avons Glorious Nelson dans New York, Gary Altidore dans New York, nous avons Dorelas qui est dans Boston, et qui compte encore Obed Lamy. Obed Lamy était dans Springfield, Ohio, et puis nous remercions tous les correspondants.
Luxon Saint-Ville.
Luxon Saint-Ville, le saint de la ville, et Luxon Saint-Ville qui était dans Floride. Et puis nous remercions tous les correspondants, tout parce que eux même étaient banou, ils ont idée de qui Jean Haïti lui-même la vive moment électoral ça ici aux États-Unis. Mes amis, c'est là n'a été fait dans le programme, c'est un plaisir comme d'habitude pour nous avoir. Nos pas c'est Jacques Bélizer.
Et moi c'est Jean-Robert Philippe, on est avec le peuple à parler. Je dis assez verdict là. Donc candidat a passé près de 2 ans à mener campagne etc. Chercher nomination parti, chercher l'argent pour mener campagne, parler avec peuple, faire voyage à droite à gauche etc. Et bien je dis à peuple là il a décidé qui est ce monde la dans la Maison Blanche et qui est ce monde la dans le Congrès et qui est ce monde qui est comme autorité locale. C'est ça le verdict de l'urne. Donc, c'est bulletin de vote, il est capable de parler.
Merci pour l'attention, merci pour la fidélité. On va oublier que toute plateforme disponible pour capable de joindre dernière information concernant l'élection ici aux États-Unis. Bonsoir tout le monde.
Results and the crowd here supporting Donald Trump very excited. Donald Trump is not here, David, at this convention center. He's over at Mar-a-Lago, where, David, I'm told he's been gathered with senior staff and family in a war room that's been set up at his club, going through results. And just in the last couple of minutes, David, he actually went into the grand ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, according to reporting from my colleague Catherine Falders and I, where he actually went around and greeted supporters and donors that are there. Our sources tell us, David, that in addition to donors and club members, he's there with his new campaign surrogates, billionaire Elon Musk and RFK Jr. And in addition to the family, David, who's been advising and campaigning with Donald Trump, his eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric, there with Dad tonight. Barron Trump also there. And a photo, David, that Melania Trump, the former First Lady, just tweeted in the last couple of minutes. Barron, who turned 18 this year, David, casting a vote for his father earlier today. David?
John Santucci with some color inside Trump headquarters there, Palm Beach Convention Center. John, thank you. Let's go right over to Eva Pilgrim. She's at the Kamala Harris headquarters, Howard University in Washington. Eva, what's the mood there?
They're watching the numbers as they come in right now. They are watching a speech from Angela Alsobrooks, who was just declared the winner in that Maryland Senate seat. You can see the crowd here cheering. The flags, those are American flags. Those flags back there, I just want to point out, those are college students in that back area. They're sort of pinned in back there. They've been here since very early. They got here. And they've been cheering and excited. I wish you could hear earlier. There was loud music. Everyone was dancing everywhere they are. You know, we've been speaking with the campaign as they've seen these numbers come in tonight. And they've sort of stuck with what they told us yesterday when we last spoke with them, which was the idea that this event here tonight on Howard's campus, as they watch the election results come in, was going to be an information center for them. They've been very clear with their supporters about how they expect these numbers to come in. The expectation that a lot of the red states would be reporting early and that the blue states would come in later, and to wait for those numbers to come in and for those states to report. And some of those blue states, as we all know, take a little bit longer to come in. And so this isn't an event that they thought they were going to have a result at tonight. This was an opportunity for people to come here. This was an opportunity for them to have a place to get information out, to keep people informed, to keep them, their supporters, calm as they watch these numbers come in tonight. But they are still cautiously optimistic as they wait to see exactly what unfolds here tonight, David.
All right, Eva Pilgrim at Howard University. Eva, thank you. Mary Bruce, you've been in contact with your sources at the campaign. What are they saying about the night? I gather they'll say this is the path that we knew we were working towards, and that means it's a late night.
Bingo. They they knew that this was going to be tight. They knew this was going to take a long time. The message coming from the Harris campaign right now is just everybody wait. They are not prepared to say at this point that it's, blue wall or bust. They still feel that they, have a chance in North Carolina and Georgia, that some of those places that are left to report out, may be more of their supporters. But look, they always knew that this was going to be a very close race and was going to take a lot of time. And we certainly are seeing that play out right now.
All right, we can project another winner here in the state of Iowa. Former President Donald Trump picks up 6 electoral votes in the state of Iowa. This is particularly interesting. We thought Iowa would go to Donald Trump, but then a lot of news in the last few days before this election. The final Des Moines Register poll from J.N. Seltzer, obviously respected political scientist. But there are going to be a lot of questions about what she missed in the poll.
I mean, really, she was tracking a narrow lead for Kamala Harris. It sent shockwaves throughout the political world, what it could mean for other states, not just Iowa. So to see Iowa coming in for Donald Trump, and apparently by a very convincing margins, looks like a serious swing and a miss from a usually reliable pollster.
I'll head over to the big board here with Rick. Let's just dive into some of these Rust Belt states, the so-called blue wall. I'm curious, Wisconsin, we were looking at a moment ago, and you were showing me a number of the counties. Let's look at the WOW counties, which are conservative leaning, Republican leaning, and what she would have to do in those counties around Milwaukee. Waukesha, for example.
Yep, exactly. The Waukesha County is one of the classic suburban counties with a good history of being going Republican. You see how Kamala Harris did. We also see where she's doing vis-a-vis the 538 benchmark.
So she's outperforming in Waukesha.
That's right. That's right. Which is the most Republican of the county. So she's got to like these numbers. You're losing by 45,000 votes. That's never good, but it's better than the opposite.
But just look at this. This is a 1,000-vote race in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, you do this to us every time. You're doing it to us again tonight. Between these two candidates, a very close race. Let's look at some of the other counties surrounding Milwaukee.
Yeah, Ozaukee is another big one, and we're seeing her just a smidge beyond where she would need to be to make this a 50-50 race. Washington County, she's a little bit below that. Milwaukee, we know that there's a lot of the vote that probably isn't going to be accounted for a while. They had to rerun a bunch of the ballots. An 84,000 vote edge here, more than making up for it. We're also been looking at Madison. That's a liberal stronghold, but functionally speaking, she's not going to get as many votes here in all likelihood as even though she's getting close to the benchmark, she's not going to get as many votes here as Joe Biden did, both in terms of the margin as well as the total number of votes. You have to just kind of rack it up in Dane County and Madison and Milwaukee if you're going to win as a Democrat in Wisconsin.
You're talking about the University of Wisconsin right here, obviously.
That's right.
I'm just curious because we haven't talked about this yet tonight. I mean, obviously, it's a blue county, right? Let's just look at the benchmark where Donald Trump needs to be. See, he's outperforming slightly, but that matters on both sides here as they rack up the vote. I'm curious, in university towns, I wonder when we look back, the young male vote from some of these university towns, that was a huge part of the Trump campaign. I don't know if that's going to bear out, but that might be part of the equation in some of these university centers on why she might be just underperforming slightly from where she would need to be having a winning night here. Obviously, she's ahead by 1,800 votes. Very close race in Wisconsin, but these are the tiny little margins we're going to be looking at.
And we're seeing that in so many different places, David, too. We're just seeing places where Donald Trump is doing better than his 538 benchmark. Sometimes it's not as dramatic as this is. If you look at the final votes here, Harris isn't even close to where she was last time in Green Bay. A bunch of places where you're just not seeing the Harris numbers and you are seeing the Trump numbers. It's very striking. There's a similar storyline that's playing out throughout Pennsylvania tonight. Again, we're waiting on a lot of vote. We're waiting on all of these Democratic places. It's all there, but it isn't too early to say. Look at a county like Schuylkill, where the 538 benchmark would have Harris needing to get 28, 29 points. Not there, not even close. In some of these counties, they're not that big, but they've got most of the vote in already. And you're seeing Donald Trump tick up a little bit from his margins last time around. And that adds up over time, even if these aren't big places.
No question. Let's look at Allegheny County.
Yeah, Allegheny County, Harris is hitting her number almost exactly. But again, it's not right now enough to kind of outweigh what's happening elsewhere in the state.
The Erie County, which was obviously one of these boomerang counties.
Yeah,
she appears to be holding on.
She appears to be holding on. We have a lot of votes still outstanding.
Benchmark is here.
Yeah, she's doing well beyond it, but there's
yeah.
so much vote outstanding, and it's hard to say what it is. Scranton is another great one to look at. Kamala Harris is not quite where 538 would suggest she needs to be, not quite where Joe Biden was, a little bit better than Hillary Clinton. Meanwhile, Trump, look at the other side of that. Trump is doing better than he did either time that he ran in Lackawanna County.
So 123,000 votes separates the two of them. Donald Trump in the lead in Pennsylvania right now. Michigan, what are we looking at?
Yeah, in Michigan, we're seeing a lead right now for Harris of almost exactly the same, and we have a lot of the urban areas in the state still to go. I mean, start with Washtenaw County, Ann Arbor. You talk about your college towns. Here's an interesting one where Trump is doing a little bit better again than the benchmark. So that might play out that theory. Lansing, there isn't a lot of vote there, but so far we're seeing a little bit better than the benchmark would suggest in a place that will be pretty liberal at the end of the night. And of course, we're going to be really dialed into Wayne County. That is Detroit. It's also Dearborn, where there's a very large Arab American population that's been critical of Kamala Harris and the Joe Biden Israel policy. Not a lot of vote there to learn much about it yet.
And what's the benchmark? How is she doing compared to where she needs to be?
She's doing far better, but there's so little vote in there. And we believe it's the early in-person vote, which happened for the first time in Michigan this time.
We're looking at margins of 100,000 votes in Michigan, 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania separates them, and 1,500 votes in Wisconsin?
That's right there. It's 5,000 votes.
Yeah.
It's less than 5,000 votes in Wisconsin. And again, that is the only path she has left if North Carolina and Georgia don't go her way. And we've had some significant news in North Carolina. We were talking earlier about that big vote that was out in Charlotte. Well, we got a lot of that vote now. It's 90% reporting. Kamala Harris did very well. She picked up 170,000 votes out of Charlotte, but she's still losing by 130,000. And those big blue dots are getting smaller. Less and less of that outstanding vote there for her to make up significant margin. And that 135,000 is significant when you're already in a state that has got 84% reporting.
Yeah. All right. Well, North Carolina, it's narrowing the chances in North Carolina, which really then looks like the Rust Belt would be the only path. Virginia's been interesting to me. How close is this race still?
Yeah, we're seeing Harris begin to open up a little bit more of a lead, but again, this shouldn't be close. That's I think what really going to be the story of Virginia, is that there really wasn't a world where this should have been close. And you look at some places where Kamala Harris is running significantly below Joe Biden. Loudoun County, which is the suburbs of Washington D.C., which makes it a bluer state. Trump's not getting to his benchmark, which means he's not going to win the state, but he's running significantly better than he did the other times that he ran. And that to me is just that is almost across the board storyline tonight, that places where, whether it's blue or red, Donald Trump has beaten his number by a little bit.
Not only beating his number from last time, but beat his number when he ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016. He's outperforming in some of these counties. Let's head up to Rhode Island, New Hampshire, some of these other states that typically we would call earlier in the night.
Yeah, Rhode Island is projected now, but it was closer than it should have been by all rights. And you see some more working class parts of the state tending to do a little bit redder. Even in the capital of Providence, Kamala Harris not quite Joe Biden's numbers. You start to see that kind of erosion, that slippage. It doesn't really matter where it is. Yeah, New Hampshire, we haven't had a projection yet. We're talking about a 20,000 vote margin in a state that gets a lot of political attention. A lot of the Democratic votes are here in the southern part. We have to wait to see if we get more, about half of it in so far. But the earlier point still holds, that places where Democrats should should get a projection pretty early. Connecticut and New Jersey. New Jersey, she'll win New Jersey, but the fact that we'd even mention it on air in an election night, a Connecticut on air, a 24,000 vote margin, tells you that there's something that she hasn't really been able to bring out her base in places that don't get a lot of attention at the presidential level.
The Democratic base, and it's a question of what kind of coalition, if she's able to pull this off, did she put together in order to pull it off? And if not, the questions will be why wasn't she able to pull it off? Show us in each one of these 3 blue wall states the map that shows us the outstanding vote, the percentage of the vote.
Sure. Start here in Pennsylvania, again, down 120,000 votes. That's Philadelphia and the eastern suburbs, a little bit in Pittsburgh. Places like Harrisburg, State College, Erie, they're 50-50 splits or close to it. So you're not going to net as much either way. That's the path that's still there. And it's very much an existing path. I think Pennsylvania, very realistic. Michigan, I mentioned how little vote is in Detroit right now. I think you'll see it come up in a very dramatic way there. I mean, some of these bubbles overlap because the counties are so close, and there's just a lot of vote that's left there. Harris right now, we see some new numbers, it's 100,000 votes or so. And Wisconsin, again, Milwaukee is just going to be huge here. Madison, most of the vote is already in a heavily Democratic place. Right now, it's only about 3,000 votes as the numbers continue to roll in.
And I know, Rachel, you've been diving into some of these college towns. Actually, this is going to be something we look at later, how young voters split if the gender gap was what we think it could be potentially going into election night. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we know Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, quite frankly, trying to get young male voters to turn out. Vice President Kamala Harris trying to get younger voters to turn out in general. La Crosse, home to 3 different colleges, thousands of students. Let's take a look at how she's doing here. 52% of the vote. She's ahead by 3,500 votes so far. She's pretty much almost where President Biden was, with 71% of the vote in. Eau Claire, another one. Take a look here. She's still leading in this county as well, ahead by 4,000.
Let me just check on the benchmark, though. I'm just so curious of where she's just slightly under where 538 thought she should be. Can you show us back? Let's go back to La Crosse just for a second. She's just under where she needs to be in these college towns. Where else were you looking?
Also in Madison, Dane County, this has high voter turnout here. You still have 89% of the vote in. 90% of this county turns out to vote. I don't know where that happens anywhere else in America, but she's going to need to do well here. And then, of course, Waukesha for former President Donald Trump, going to be absolutely critical. This doesn't have to go Republican. It has to go super Republican. This is really where he has to super energize his base. And then also, Rick was talking about Milwaukee. Former President Donald Trump campaigning here also multiple times. Look, traditionally, yes, this does go towards Democrats, of course. Vice President Kamala Harris right now, 66%. Let's see where she is with the 538 benchmark. Just under that right now. But former President Donald Trump, Waukesha is where he earns the most votes, 2016, 2020. The second highest for him is Milwaukee. So he still has to run up the score in Milwaukee in order to do well.
All right, this is the key number at this hour, 6,500 votes between them. Donald Trump leading in Wisconsin tonight. We're going to keep our eye on all 3 of these states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Don't go away. We'll dive into these numbers even more right after the break.
electoral vote coming out of Nebraska. It's in Omaha. Sometimes they call it Obamaha because Obama won it, helped him win the presidency in 2008. So look, if we're looking at a scenario where Kamala Harris's path to winning the presidency is to win the blue wall and not to win any of the other battleground states in the Sun Belt, it would be 270 votes to 268 votes. The single vote that would put her over the top would be in Omaha. It would be that split electoral vote in the state of Nebraska. Of course, we got a long way to go before we get to that point. But that's why Republicans tried to change the rules in Nebraska. Lindsey Graham made a trip all the way out to Nebraska to try to convince
this election cycle.
Yes, this election cycle. Donald Trump got involved. He called some of the state legislators to try to get them to change the rules there. They didn't change the rules, and that could be a very pivotal single electoral vote.
Could be. But it's early. It's early.
We got a long way to go.
So let's go back to some of these Senate races. We want to call a few more races here. In New Jersey, we can call the Senate race now for the Democrat. Congressman Andy Kim, a three-term congressman running for Senate. He wins. He's going to now take over the seat that was once held by Robert Menendez until he was convicted. So Congressman Andy Kim wins in New Jersey. In Virginia, seeking a third term, Senator Tim Kaine has been reelected in Virginia, though the race has not been called in Virginia on the presidential level, which is quite extraordinary for this time of the night. In Texas at this hour, we can say Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who was seeking a third term, has been reelected to the Senate. He'd been challenged by Congressman Colin Allred, of course, former Baylor University Tennessee Titans football player, a three-term congressman himself. He had campaigned on so many issues, reproductive rights, one of them. Lindsay, you interviewed him in just the last week or two, and the Democrats really thought he had some prospects there. They were putting some late money into the campaign.
As you know, David, football is a little bit more of a popular pastime in Texas than politics is. And Colin Allred really staked a lot on that. Even his campaign ads really started on the football field, ended on the football field. He talked about how he'd taken down a lot tougher opponents than Ted Cruz before. But look, this really was an uphill battle for him. It's been 30 years to Election Day when a Democrat was able to win a statewide position in the state of Texas. And so really, this was a fierce, it shouldn't have been really when you think about it, but Ted Cruz has a pretty high unpopularity rate in the state of Texas. But for Colin Allred, this is really a disappointment. He actually thought that he was going to be able to do it. And do want to give a shout out to Andy Kim, the first Korean American to ever be a U.S. senator.
Now he'll represent New Jersey in the Senate. No question. Let's get right to John Quinones on the ground in Texas. John, what do you make of the news?
Well, this was one of the most closely watched races in the country, David. The incumbent Republican, Ted Cruz, once a presidential candidate himself, challenged by three-term Democratic congressman and former, like Lindsay said, former NFL linebacker Colin Allred. They campaigned bitterly in the state over women's reproductive rights, the border, transgender rights. Cruz calling Allred too liberal for Texas. In the end, amidst a changing political landscape here in Texas, Ted Cruz survived the challenge just a few minutes ago. In his victory speech, Cruz specifically thanked Latino voters in this state, which he says have proven all the political prognosticators wrong.
John Quinones on the ground there in Texas. John, thank you. And look at the margin there. That's a much bigger margin than even Beto O'Rourke when he took on Ted Cruz. Came almost within 2 points of defeating Ted Cruz, Rachel.
Yeah, within 2 points, much bigger margin this time. And that is because Colin Allred really underperformed in some of the big cities. So let's take Harris County. This is home to Houston. You can see the 538 benchmark that we have has him at 58. He got 53. Let's go over to Austin. This is Travis County. 74% is what he needed to meet. 71 is where he was. David, I will tell you, Lindsay already said it, but Ted Cruz, deeply unpopular, even in his own state. He's tried to rebrand his image to be more approachable, to be more bipartisan. I don't think there's anywhere else in this country where Cancun was talked about more than in this state. You remember those images of Ted Cruz at the airport after that deadly winter storm. Colin Allred read ad after ad on that, but ultimately Ted Cruz remained victorious in this state.
Rick Klein, you're over at the big board as well. What are you seeing in some of these key battlegrounds? How's Pennsylvania looking at this hour?
Yeah, Pennsylvania right now is still a problem for Kamala Harris, an advantage Donald Trump, 100,000 vote margin, a lot left of the vote. And as some of these bubbles will tell you the story about what's left. 175,000 votes left in Philadelphia is our estimate. Another 193,000 in Delaware County, Delco, a place where Harris is winning very big. Bucks County, still a lot of votes to be counted there, 240,000. So that's what's keeping this as a competitive state right now. But we've seen the numbers shift as more of the Republican parts of the state have fallen in line for Donald Trump. It's been almost consistent across the board. Again, not the biggest counties, but places where he's been able to build on his lead consistently.
I think that's a good example. What you pulled up, Perry County. Just look at the threshold, the 538 threshold of where he needs to be. And this is the story of the night. He's outperforming slightly in all these rural counties. I think we're seeing this in a number of the swing states, which is helping him to build these margins against Kamala Harris.
That's exactly right. And it adds up over time. And I think that's similar to what we've seen in Michigan, similar in Wisconsin. Michigan doesn't have a lot of vote in right now, but you're seeing some areas where Donald Trump in the past has not particularly not been that strong. This is more of a swingy type county. You can see where Joe Biden was. You see where Kamala Harris is. You see where Donald Trump was. You see where he is right now. And in many cases, it's that he's beating himself twice over, right? This guy's been on the ballot a lot. Voters have had the opportunity to vote for him or vote against him several times now. So again, it's not the big urban areas. That's going to go pretty Democratic. And it's still possible that Harris pulls out enough of the vote in Madison and Milwaukee where we're still waiting on vote. But it becomes difficult as time goes by. And that really is the story that's developing now in North Carolina. When we look at our remaining votes, these blue dots have been getting smaller throughout the night. And when you really get into it, you're talking about 115,000 votes. Okay, that's that if you win that 2-1, you start to chip away at that 145,000 vote lead. But there may not be enough of those blue dots left in a Georgia or North Carolina based on what we're seeing tonight.
All right, we're going to continue to drill down on these blue wall states with Rick Klein and Rachel Scott over at the board. We're closing in on 11 o'clock here in the east, 8 o'clock on the west. 4 more states set to close, including California with its 54 electoral votes. Your local news is next, and we'll see you just minutes from now with more numbers coming in, including the Sunbelt states. We'll be right back. in the Philadelphia area and other Democratic strongholds. The question is it enough to help catch her back up? And how tight will this race be in the end? We always knew Pennsylvania could be very tight, 19 electoral votes on the line. Michigan at this hour, take a look. These are the numbers. Kamala Harris with a slight lead in that state, just 29% of the vote in. At this hour, the vice president leads the former president in that state. And in Wisconsin, 4 out of the last 6 presidential elections, Wisconsin decided by less than a point. 59% of the vote in, 10 electoral votes on the line, and you can see a very close race, about 30,000 votes in between the two candidates. Let's look at Arizona at this hour. Look at that, 49.5, 49.6 in Arizona. Obviously can't call that race. Nevada tonight, the numbers have not come in yet. Another battleground, though, obviously, where the polls have closed. There are projections we can make at this hour, so let's get right to them. In the state of California, Vice President Kamala Harris, where she was once the Attorney General and the senator of that state, she wins in that state, picks up its 54 electoral votes. In Idaho tonight, former President Donald Trump picks up 4 electoral votes from Idaho. Washington State, the polls have closed. The raw vote coming in. The number's not there yet. The moment we have it, we'll put it back up on the screen. Too early to call. And in Oregon, the polls have just closed. Cannot call that state as well. Let's look at the map tonight. 270, again, the magic number in the Electoral College. Here's what we've got. Kamala Harris with 9 states plus Washington, D.C., 145 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 23 states, 214 electoral votes. And, of course, those key battleground states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of them. The votes are coming in, and in all those states, it's extraordinarily close. Our coverage of the 2024 presidential election, it could last for weeks. I'm not sure. I was just making sure you're all still here with me. It continues right now.
This is an ABC News special. Election Night in America. Who will be the next president of the United States? From ABC News headquarters in New York, here again, David Muir.
Good evening as we come back on the air in the West. It's great to have you with us here, ABC News election headquarters here in New York. This is an extremely close race in all of the key battlegrounds. I want to get right to Mary Bruce, covering the vice president, covering the Harris campaign. And basically, you got your hands on a memo that went out to internal staff saying this is going to buckle up. This is going to be a long election.
This email reads like a reality check from the Harris campaign manager to her staff. We've obtained this by ABC News. And she says what we have all been talking about, that they knew this race was going to be razor thin. She says this is exactly what they prepared for, and that their clearest path to 270 remains to be through the blue wall that we've been talking about all night. She says we feel good about what we are seeing. That said, she is cautioning that this is going to take some time. She runs through those blue wall states, saying in Pennsylvania, they overperformed turnout expectations in Philadelphia. She says they're seeing especially high turnout with large non-white and student populations. And then in Michigan and Wisconsin, she notes, they are still awaiting a significant amount of the vote to come in Michigan, pointing to Detroit, also saying other results in Michigan are harder to parse. In Wisconsin, she points to remaining vote in Dane and Milwaukee counties. And then what she says, David, is what we do know is this race is not going to come into focus until the early morning hours. David, she urges their team to, quote, get some sleep and get ready to close out strong tomorrow.
John?
But can I say that is absolutely the message that we're hearing tonight from the Kamala Harris campaign. But I am also talking to Democrats, not precisely on the Kamala Harris campaign, but with very much a vested interest in what's happening here, who are feeling that this is looking very bad for her, who are very concerned about the trends they're seeing, both in those Sunbelt states, concerns about what they're seeing in Wisconsin, and seeing a path. Sure, this is not over. It's certainly not over, but seeing it as a very steep and narrow path for Kamala Harris.
And do they recognize in a lot of these Republican counties, it's sort of like Donald Trump performing just over the threshold of where he needed to be, and the numbers adding up in each one of these battleground states. It's not necessarily sort of the urban centers where they thought Kamala Harris would do well. As Rick has shown us, she has done well in a lot of those areas. It's in the Republican counties where he's done better than he did 4 years ago, and in some cases is doing better than he did in 2016.
Which is astounding, because he did far better than anybody anticipated in both of those presidential cycles, in those rural, deep red Republican areas. So yes, that's the primary factor here, is Trump really appears to be turning out his voters and turning them out at a level perhaps even exceeding what they expected. But there are pockets where she's not doing as well. You look in Wisconsin, that area around Madison, Dane County, she's done very well. She has to do very well, but she's fallen short of where Joe Biden was. Milwaukee, again, a lot of votes still be counted in Milwaukee, but so far what's coming in not as well as Joe Biden did. Same thing we're seeing in the area around Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County in North Carolina. So a lot of deep concerns among Democrats very vested in this campaign. Although, to be sure, as you've heard from Mary, the campaign, the Harris campaign, still very much sees a path and says this is going to be long and we need to be patient. And I think when they say long, they don't mean a long night, they mean a long week.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's sobering, John Carl. Appreciate it. Take no offense. We appreciate the reporting and the analysis. And you're right, because you point to Madison, you point to Charlotte and some of these other cities where she has performed, but not to the level that they hoped that she would in order to pull this off. Donna Brazile, you are a veteran of these campaigns. And when you hear what the campaign chair is saying within the Harris campaign, you've actually heard that before.
Oh, I just opened up when I heard Mary said, I said, oh, I got a memo finally. Look, I've worked on too many Democratic campaigns to throw in the towel. This is when it gets really good. If you're a good Democrat, you know you got to stay up past midnight to find some joy. There's some outstanding ballots. And of course, Philly, we talked about Milwaukee. I'm still waiting for Detroit to come in because for the first time, Wayne County allowed people to vote on the same day. It's going to be close. We're not going to win all 7 battleground states. The blue wall is clearly more important than ever. I don't want to feel like 2016. By 11:20 at night, we were calling into Milwaukee to say, there's nothing left. Well, if you call into Milwaukee now, there's still a lot of votes left. Philadelphia, a lot of votes. So be patient. Democrats, don't go running for the refrigerator and finding a beer. Just be patient. We're not there yet.
Donna Brazile asking the country to be patient tonight. We do have some news coming in here. The decision desk here at ABC News has not projected Georgia, but we can report that Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has now said at a press conference moments ago that Donald Trump has a, quote, insurmountable lead with the number of votes outstanding in the state of Georgia. He said, it looks like this is pretty much done. I think the results are pretty well baked in. And of course, you all at home remember our reporting on Raffensperger, the Republican who famously stood firm during that key phone call when Donald Trump asked, just find me the 11,000 votes when he lost to Joe Biden. So this is not someone who's necessarily obviously very friendly with Donald Trump. He stands by the process. He stands by the hard work in that state to make sure that this election was safe. And tonight, moments ago, again, we haven't projected this at ABC News, but the Secretary of State in Georgia saying this is insurmountable that Donald Trump has won there.
And look, Brad Raffensperger is a Republican. He's elected Republican, but he is a straight shooter. No doubt about it. So, again, we haven't called it, but I would take what he said very seriously.
Let's get right to the ground in Georgia. Steve Osunsami in Atlanta. Steve, what do you make of this? And you've talked with the Secretary of State. Facts are facts, and he has said that it looks like it's insurmountable at this point.
Well, as John said, he is a straight shooter. When I talked with him, he told me that, his job is to call balls and strikes, not to put his finger on the scale. His reputation speaks for himself on that issue. I will tell you that we've all been here. The producer I work with, Brandon Bauer, we've been really practicing our math skills, trying to figure out, whether or not there are enough votes for Harris to make up the deficit, which at one point was about 150,000 votes. We're seeing those votes come in from the different county, and it's not clear, as Raffensperger has pointed out, that there are enough votes, even if she were to continue sort of the break that she has had in some of those counties and some of those vote-rich counties like Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, where there's still a little bit of vote outstanding to make up that deficit. I'll tell you, I've also talked with both campaigns. The Trump campaign is celebrating tonight. They're already looking forward to being able to say that this is a state that they won. They point out that they did very, very well in the rural counties. We had a setup here, rural versus urban, and they clearly performed well in the rural counties. Some of those counties where we saw up to 70% turnout, those counties made a difference. What's interesting is when you look at the numbers and the turnout here and the way the vote fell, it wasn't that Harris did so much terribly than Biden performed 4 years ago. what you do see is that in the rural counties, the rural voters showed up and showed out.
I wonder, Steve, if part of that is the encouragement to vote early, the combination of early voting and day of voting, if that did just help them rack up the vote, the Republican Party in Georgia. When you look at sort of county by county, I think your point is well made, that they were really able to increase the margins. And I was saying with Rick Klein earlier, Donald Trump has outperformed himself in many cases, even what he did in 2016.
You know, we saw a huge early vote among Republicans, which we didn't see in years past. You know, we were sort of expecting, a lot of people were expecting that what we were going to see today was that when the pre-vote came out, that Harris would have a significant lead, or it would have been closer than it was. But I think that evaporated in large part because we saw so many Republicans in the pre-vote stand in line in the Republican counties that had pre-votes. You know, one thing that's interesting is something else we saw today. You know, there are a number of counties where there isn't an early vote. A lot of these red counties also had good turnout today. We didn't see, as we were driving around the city and sort of anecdotally talking to different people, we didn't see the craziness that we've seen in years past. And a lot of that is because a lot of this election happened in the pre-vote. That's when most of this was decided.
Steve-O in Atlanta, Steve Osunsami, thanks so much. Ryan, what do you make of this?
Well, it's not where you want to be if you're the Harris campaign on one hand. On the other hand, there was never, the Trump campaign was always planning on winning Georgia and North Carolina. But clearly Kamala Harris's team decided that maybe they could get lucky and pick one of these two off. It's not over yet, but the fact that they spent so much time there thinking that they might get lucky there, it doesn't look like they will. And now all their eggs are going to be in that blue wall. The other thing that's interesting about all this tonight is that one change in the law from 2020 to 2024, these states are counting a lot of these early votes right now. I mean, Georgia started counting this morning. North Carolina started counting at 5 o'clock, Wisconsin 7, Michigan 7, Pennsylvania 7. One note, and Rick hit it earlier, which is important about Wisconsin. Right now, the last I checked, Donald Trump has a lead of about 38,000 votes. So it was just a few minutes ago. I don't know if it held. But there's 31,000 ballots that still need to be counted in Milwaukee. So the Republicans in Wisconsin are saying Donald Trump's going to have about a 21 to 24,000 vote lead before those 31,000 votes get counted. So this is going to be very, very close. And if you look at Racine and Kenosha County down in the southeast corner, you'll see that those two counties together, if you go up one north in Racine, there's only 23% in. But that's a huge, those are some huge numbers where they need to be.
So let's just drill down on that, Ryan. So what are your sources telling you? Where does Donald Trump need to be before these final votes in some of these Democrat-rich counties?
Right. People believe, and I was just talking to Governor Walker on text about this, and he agrees that Donald Trump needs to have about a 21,000 vote lead before those 31,000 absentee ballots get counted or entered into the system in Milwaukee that are still sitting out there. So it's, he's got a 41,000, Trump's got a 41,000 vote lead right now. There's more to come, and there's more blue votes to come in as well. So a long way to go, but rather be Donald Trump here than Kamala Harris.
In Wisconsin. Say that again, Donna.
I would rather be Kamala Harris. Look, you know the state better than I know it, but I also know how difficult it is to get all of the votes counted in Milwaukee. And also Dane. I mean, Dane had not only a significant early vote, but also a great turnout today with the same day registration, as well as some of the young people in line. So I still believe the verdict is still out. We may not know Milwaukee, the final verdict until sometime tomorrow morning.
Could be
too
right.
early.
You could be right.
Well, you owe me a beer.
I don't think you're going to be right, but you could be. I'm not saying
I'll
it's
take
over.
Milwaukee best.
I mean,
I'd rather be where we're at.
Spotted cow. But Dane County, they've already counted 94% of the vote. And she seems to have fallen short. That's a
John, these are razor thin margin.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
come on, let's not
But
try
let's
to
look at
win
the,
by a blowout. I mean, she's getting there.
But
let's look at the map that shows the outstanding vote, Rick.
Yeah,
by party here.
Yeah, I mean that's Milwaukee. That's exactly what Reince is talking about. It's a huge amount of vote that is Milwaukee. That's why 43,000 is not necessarily a safe lead. Madison, a little bit of a smaller dot, but there's some red spots on the map as well. You go out to the west to St. Croix. I mean, we don't really have any vote there to speak of at all. So there's still Republican votes too, but Reince is right. I mean, as with all three of these Midwestern cities, we're not really going to know until we have a complete portrait of what's going on inside Philadelphia, where there's still, according to our numbers, about 120,000 votes that are outstanding. That's just Philadelphia, not even counting its suburbs. Similarly, if you go up to Michigan, we don't have a lot in Detroit, only about 15,000. That's another 750,000 votes in Detroit, Dearborn, in Wayne County. And as we just talked about, Milwaukee. But those are the big urban areas, and that's what makes any lead right now potentially illusory. North Carolina and Georgia does look different right now, David. It's very hard to see how that ground gets made up because you start to see those blue dots shrink over time, and there's less and less vote. And if you get into it, you realize, Fulton County, that's 93,000 or 93% of the vote in, only 41,000 left. So where you get the enough votes to shrink the margin becomes difficult to see at this hour. Mecklenburg, Charlotte already came in as well, and we're starting to see Trump, really romp on the score. I mean, this is obviously not a meaningful number at the end of the night, but as of now, he's winning the popular vote by 5,600,000 votes. That will change with California. There's a lot of votes out there, but that's not a result that a lot of people saw coming, that it would even be close on the popular vote side. I think it's a function of all that rural run-up and how close he has kept it in all these other states.
Extraordinary night unfolding. Rick Klein over at the big board. Rick, thanks. We do have some calls at this hour. ABC News can now project that Vice President Kamala Harris will pick up the 8 electoral votes from Oregon. She has won the state of Oregon. She's also won the state of Washington tonight. The 12 electoral votes from Washington will go to Kamala Harris. And we have a race to call in California tonight in the Senate race. Congressman Adam Schiff, 12-term congressman in California, beats Republican Steve Garvey. Obviously, that was an open seat after Dianne Feinstein, the late Dianne Feinstein. Let's get right to Kana Whitworth in California covering this race. Kana, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so David, this will now be the first time in 3 decades that California will be represented by 2 male senators, and it is certainly an exciting night here for Democrats in California. We are at the Democratic Party where they do actually expect Adam Schiff to address the crowd here momentarily. This has been a race that Democrats have been very, very confident in this win. He is certainly a name known well across this country in terms of politics. He has been one of the leaders against Donald Trump in several issues, and he feels like anytime Donald Trump invokes his name negatively, that actually bodes well for him and his campaign. He's also been spending a tremendous amount of his own political capital helping other races in other battleground states, as well as down ballot races here in California, in particular, some of those hotly contested and very expensive House races in particular. And you guys, I just spoke with Rusty Hicks, who is the California Democratic Party chair, and he said, California is generous with time, talent, and treasure, and he says they have doubled down on that this year because of who is at the top of the ticket, the daughter of California and Kamala Harris. He says they're sending busloads of people. They're making phone calls in other battleground states, David, including Nevada and Arizona.
All right, Kana Whitworth on the ground in California. Kana, our thanks to you. I want to get right back over to Rachel Scott. Rachel, you got some interesting numbers coming in from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and really looking at State College, this is the county of Center. This is home to Penn State, and this is a college town here. So Vice President Kamala Harris hoping to do well here. David, I want to show you President Biden won this county. Clinton won this county. Vice President Kamala Harris underperforming where she needs to be at this moment, according to our 538 benchmark. Take a look at this. She needs to be at 51%. She's at 47%. Donald Trump ahead. This county has gone Democratic for the last 20 years. And right now, with 81% of the vote in, Donald Trump ahead.
Very interesting. And I think there's going to be a lot about the youth vote and how it broke down and whether or not the gender gap bears out that we've reported on, John.
And Trump had a huge rally in State College in these closing days. It was one of his biggest of the final rallies. A lot of college students turning out, waiting in line for a long time, sitting through a long rally. Really quite a story.
And you have some exit polls on the youth vote in Pennsylvania. What are you seeing?
Yes, Donald Trump actually doing 8 points better with the group 18 to 29 than he did when he was in 2020. But Kamala Harris is winning. It's still just that he's doing better than he did. 53% of the vote, a little more than half, going for Kamala Harris. And this is a group that certainly she has gone after. She has talked about how Gen Z is impatient for change. The baton is in our hands. She's talked multiple times about a new way forward. We're seeing more of the same in Wisconsin, where she's edging him out, but still he's doing much better than he did in 2020. Here she has half of that youth vote in Wisconsin for that 18 to 29, but Donald Trump's still outperforming himself from 2020.
Wow, it's really interesting because when I was over looking at Wisconsin with you, we were looking at Madison, and I was wondering if the youth vote and the gender gap is going to become a story in some of these key counties. And when you see Lindsay saying that Kamala Harris eking out by 2 points in the exit polls among young voters, and what is the benchmark of where she should be in Dane County? I mean, obviously she's beating him there, but
a full point behind, and that's exactly it. And it's not just the percentages; it's often going to be turnout as well. And this is a county that Biden was able to get, I think, around 180,000 votes out of it. I talked to someone, a Wisconsin specialist, who said that's what you need for years now. Reince knows this better than anyone. Democrats have been running up the score in Madison, the liberal college town, and said got as much as they can, and maybe they reached a limit tonight.
I think it's really interesting. Thanks, Rick. We're going to stay on this. We're going to be laser focused on Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, which we sound like a broken record. We say this every 4 years or so. And I think it's interesting that both Reince and Donna believe that this is going to be very close, particularly in a state like Wisconsin. And, Reince is from there, so he knows Wisconsin better than any of us. So the numbers continue to come in. We'll be right back. Your local news. We're going to check in with your local news teams, and we'll see you a short time from now.
Trump will win Nebraska, Iowa, Idaho, and Kansas. ABC News also projecting Harris will win California, Oregon, Washington, and New York. Here's where each candidate stands right now. A candidate needs 270 to win. VP Kamala Harris at 165. Former President Donald Trump, 214. Let's get right to Colorado. ABC News can now project project rather that Colorado's ballot initiative ensuring the right to an abortion in the state constitution will pass. The amendment needed 55% of that vote to pass. Let's also take a quick look at the Senate. Overall, at this hour, 34 seats in play, one notable win. Republican Senator Ted Cruz in Texas is projected to hold his seat after a tight race with Democratic Representative Colin Allred. Let's go straight to our Whit Johnson. He is in Mar-a-Lago tonight at Trump headquarters. Whit, let's talk about Team Trump and all the supporters. How are they feeling tonight?
Hey, Kira, well, the energy is really starting to come alive here at Trump headquarters. You can hear the music behind me here, and they are celebrating as these states are being projected, and North Carolina has just popped up here on the screens here. Now, I should note that the Trump campaign has been putting some of these projections out here before we have, but I can tell you everybody's very excited and energized. One thing that we've also learned is that Speaker Mike Johnson is expected to travel from Louisiana to here to Mar-a-Lago to be with former President Trump tonight. He told the crowd he was actually at an event in Louisiana, and he told them that he was going to Mar-a-Lago. And that's something, forgive me, a lot going on here. But Speaker Johnson, among those very confident in the way things are playing out for Donald Trump tonight. Kira.
And possibly Elon Musk showing up there as well. Whit Johnson, we'll keep checking in with you there in Mar-a-Lago. Now to the Harris headquarters at Howard University. Eva Pilgrim is there. Eva, let's talk about the atmosphere there.
Well, Kira, I can tell you there has been a real vibe shift here in the last 30 minutes to 45 minutes or so. We were actually starting to see some people that are leaving. There have been streams of people going. The crowd has thinned out just a little bit. You know, we've spoken with campaign sources who they tell us that they think that they can still hold the blue wall. But when we talk to people within the Democratic Party, there's a real concern that's starting to build as they look at the margins in these blue wall states, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan. There's nerves, a lot of nerves tonight about the numbers that they're seeing coming in and just how she's performing versus how Joe Biden did 4 years ago. One of the things the Harris campaign keeps sending us is information about the long lines at college campuses. And one source said to me, we can't count on those votes for Harris. Kira.
All right, Eva Pilgrim, thank you so much. I'm Kira Phillips. So glad that you are with us tonight. I hope you'll stay with ABC News. Our team is bringing you election results all throughout the night, led by our David Muir. Don't go far. Our race for the White House coverage continues.
America's #1
tonight, the race to 270. Kamala Harris with 165 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 214. Let's get right over to Rick Klein at the big board. Rick, you're tracking Arizona. What do we see?
Yeah, first numbers we're seeing out of Arizona, obviously a little bit of a later poll closing time. And this is about what we expected. It is a absolute horse race in the first big data dump that we've gotten. 51% of the vote in. So we think that is the early vote up through last week. So there's a big chunk of vote, including the people that dropped off ballots on election day that aren't there. The key county to watch here is Maricopa. It's the biggest battleground county in the country. We still have more than 1 million votes outstanding. So any of the numbers we're getting now are really going to be preliminary. I will say we were keeping an eye on one smaller county to see if it was true that Donald Trump was making inroads with Latino voters. This is a heavily Hispanic community down on the U.S.-Mexico border. And you're seeing Donald Trump beat that 538 benchmark by about 5 percentage points. This was a place where Hillary Clinton got 70+% of the vote. Joe Biden got down to about 67. Harris is below that right now with about 60% of the vote in. Pima County, that's kind of the Democratic base of the state. We're seeing Kamala Harris run a little bit above her 538 benchmark. And it's a little bit intriguing to think about. We talk about how the blue wall is now the main strategy for Harris with things looking good for Trump in the South. There is a bit of a backup plan. If Harris were able to win Arizona and Nevada, it could potentially trade off a loss in Wisconsin and Michigan. Nothing trades off a loss in Pennsylvania, but a Wisconsin and the Michigan could be offset with a win through those two Western states if we get to that point of the night.
Okay, we got about 45 seconds before we have to take a break. Let's look at Pennsylvania. Where do things stand real quick?
Yeah, Pennsylvania, we've got almost a 200,000 vote margin between the two of them with about 77% of the vote in. Keying in on Philadelphia, still 250,000 votes there in a city that's going 3-1, and still a lot of votes left, 95,000 in Delco. 228,000 in Montgomery. Bucks County, which is a little more evenly split, 200,000 additional votes. Chester County, 182. Out in Pittsburgh to check in about 57,000 votes. So we do have areas that the Democrats can still pick up, but that looms large. We're talking about 3.5 percentage points and 188,000 votes that have to be made up in the remaining vote in these places.
It's tall order. Rick Klein over at the big board. Rick, thank you. When we come back, we'll be joined by the rest of the country. Our live coverage of the 2024 election returns here in just a moment. Right back to the battleground states.
Attention all units. Possible elder abduction in progress.
Thursday.
Suspect is on the roof, requesting backup.
2 daring rescues.
My little brother's trapped.
He's about 20 feet down.
I'm scared.
1 new hero.
Someone's got to go down there.
I don't think you're going to fit this time.
There's someone who can.
I can do it. I'm his big brother.
If we don't try this, we might not get to him in time.
Jack!
911 returns Thursday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Why is this so hard?
us for coverage across the country again at this hour. And we have another state to call, Connecticut. Vice President Kamala Harris picks up the 7 electoral votes in Connecticut. We'll take you out to Minnesota. We have a Senate race to call. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's seeking a 4th term, very popular in her state. She's been projected the winner at this hour. She returns to the Senate for a 4th term. Big shakeup in Ohio tonight. We reported on this earlier in the evening. It was going in this direction, and Republican challenger Bernie Moreno, a businessman, Colombian-born, would be one of the wealthiest senators, and now he is. He has beaten Sherrod Brown. This was one of the most expensive congressional races in history. Sherrod Brown held on even as the tide turned and his state became a red state. But tonight, Sherrod Brown has been defeated. Bernie Moreno becomes the next senator from Ohio. And Rachel, you're over at the board. This is a pickup.
This is a huge shakeup now, especially for Democrats and any hope that they have to sort of hang on to the majority in the Senate. Sherrod Brown faced a huge challenge of trying to build back the Democratic coalition. He didn't perform as well in counties just outside of Youngstown. This is Trumbull County. You could see he underperformed here. This is also another one where Donald Trump won. Sherrod Brown won this county, Wood County, back in 2018, not performing as well here either. Bernie Moreno was Donald Trump's choice in the primary. This now means that Donald Trump has handpicked 2 of the Ohio state senators. Of course, the other one being Senator J.D. Vance, his running mate.
All right, Rachel, thanks. We do have a state to call, and this is a big one. It's North Carolina, 16 electoral votes go to former President Donald Trump. He has won the state of North Carolina tonight. Let's get right over to Rick Klein at the board. Let's show our viewers how this played out. North Carolina now in Donald Trump's column, and we can start doing these hypotheticals, the sort of the rest of the pathway to get to 270.
Yeah, this is the first major battleground state that has been projected by ABC News. So this assumes that everything else happens the way that we expect. A big if. We haven't gotten results out of a lot of safe blue states in particular tonight, but this changes the electoral math in some very significant ways. Right now, Donald Trump is in a commanding position, not just in North Carolina, but also in Georgia. If you were to award him those 2 states, he is at 251 electoral votes. That leaves him the opportunity to win the electoral college just with Pennsylvania. If Pennsylvania falls for him, that's enough. But let's assume that doesn't happen. Then you've got some other possibilities. We've been talking a lot about the other blue wall states, Michigan or Wisconsin. You take one of those and any other state on the map, and you've got 270. So you can do that with Michigan. You can do that with Wisconsin. Similar situation that you need a slightly bigger state than Nevada. In that case, you need Arizona to work. Once again, for Harris, it's now a vanishingly small map. The biggest opportunity still Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. It doesn't matter that she's lost North Carolina or even that she loses these others. The other possibility that could be intriguing given what we're seeing out west is that she pieces something else together. Pennsylvania is an absolute must win at this point. No question about it. She needs to win that state, but she could win Wisconsin in addition to Arizona and Nevada and get 270 electoral votes. She could also trade Wisconsin for Michigan and end up in the same place. But this does change very significantly where things stand. Just by our 538 calculations, Donald Trump already at around a 70% chance of winning, just based on the North Carolina call, not even taking into account the other trends that we've been talking about of the kind of red shift that we've seen across so many communities in this country.
So let's drill down on Pennsylvania at this hour, because this number, the Donald Trump lead has grown.
Yeah.
And is this a surmountable lead for the Harris campaign?
There's definitely still votes on the table where it can be made up, but it gets harder as the night goes on. As more vote comes in, because some of these places are places that Republicans will continue to pick up votes. Just looking there in Wilkes-Barre, 24,000 votes there. Donald Trump's winning that county 60-40. Lancaster, another place, another 13,000 votes there. So once you get into Philadelphia and the suburbs, yeah, it's a lot of vote that's still there. We're still talking about 250,000 votes in Philadelphia, but Kamala Harris is going to win all of them, right? She might win it by a 2-1, 3-1 margin. Then you start to chip away. The suburbs are still very big, and there's a ton of vote there. And just to add this up, that's 228, that's 200, that's 400, that's 750, 800, 900,000 votes, but they'd have to break very decisively for Harris to come through. Certainly plausible, but that doesn't take into account that there still are Republican leading communities that are still to report, and so many of these places, as Rachel talked about before, that previously had looked a little bit bluish, are tilting to the reddish. And when you start to add things up like this and Donald Trump overperforming his numbers by 4 or 5 points in places like this, 2,000 votes, 3,000 votes there, that is really the story of the night when it comes to the maps.
Governor Christie, what do you make of Pennsylvania, what you're looking at right now?
Well, I spent a lot of time there during my time as governor, and those 900,000 votes in the collar counties in Philly are a big deal. But it just keeps getting tougher and tougher there. You got over a 200,000 vote lead now, so it gets tougher. But that part of it's not over. I look at Michigan and still see Harris in a pretty good position in Michigan. And as Ryan has said before about Wisconsin, I still think that's a jump ball. Although, look, you have to say at this point, you'd rather be Trump than Harris, given the way the map is being laid out as we sit here now. And the other thing, when you mentioned Moreno before, that's a really important seat, assuming they win Montana as well. And given the way this is moving, I think you have to assume that. The reason is that gives him 52 votes in the Senate, not 51. And if you assume that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski might not be amenable to some of the choices a new President Trump might make for his cabinet, 51 would have been a potential problem. 52, even if he loses both of them, he gets to 50, and J.D. Vance can break the tie on any controversial cabinet members or judicial appointments. So the Moreno win in Ohio is an incredibly important governing win for Donald Trump, assuming that Jon Tester's beaten in Montana.
And Sherrod Brown was closer to Moreno than Jon Tester is to his challenger. And Martha, you've covered that race out in Montana. Jon Tester trying to hold on to his seat in a very red state, third generation farmer, but it's going to be tough if you look at the rest of the map
It's going to be tough. And one of the main reasons is they've had people from outside Montana move into Montana. It's kind of like Florida. They have a whole new population in many places in Montana, even though Tester has won, he's trying for his fourth term. It's also a wild race. They have a Navy SEAL, a former Navy SEAL, running against him, Tim Sheehy, who has been very controversial because there are charges that he lied about a gunshot wound he got. A park ranger said that he had told her in 2015 that he accidentally shot himself, but he had been telling the story that he got the wound in Afghanistan. Now he is a combat decorated veteran and Navy SEAL, but that particular gunshot wound allegedly did not come from those battles.
Martha, thanks. Let's get back over to Rachel on the rest of the story for Ohio. Obviously, a lot of eyes on Jon Tester at this point. Yeah. But Sherrod Brown is a major win for the Republicans tonight. The fact that he's now been defeated after trying a couple of times to get him, they got him this time.
Yeah, it's a huge win. And again, David, I just want to go back to the map here because this is important. We talked about the importance of West Virginia, a state that Donald Trump won. Also, Ohio, now that we've called it for Sherrod Brown. This is basically it here in Montana. Jon Tester, the last statewide Democrat, as Martha just mentioned, Democrats have a razor-thin majority in the Senate. Reminder, Democrats currently holding 51 seats, Republicans holding 49, and they're playing so much defense tonight with 23 seats that they are defending. That's why all eyes are on Montana and that race. And right now, not as we're waiting more vote, it's not looking good for Senator Jon Tester.
Let's race across the map. Can we look at Michigan, the Senate race there? It's an open seat. Debbie Stabenow retiring. Alyssa Slotkin, obviously a member of Congress who's up against Mike Rogers, also former member of Congress. And he's got the lead.
He's got the lead. They both represented the same exact part district in Lansing right here. Let's just take a look at how they're doing compared to the top of the ticket here. This is always fascinating for us as we're talking about split ticket voting. We have Slotkin at 56%, Harris at 55%, Mike Rogers 41%, Donald Trump at 42%. This is another one that we're going to be keeping our eyes very closely peeled on as well as they make the case in this state too, David.
But overall, statewide, he's in the lead at this point.
Overall, statewide, he is in the lead by 32,000 votes. 38% of the vote in, still a little early.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, Bob Casey.
Bob Casey over in Pennsylvania. And this is one where, again, White House also crossing roads with control of the Senate. Bob Casey from Scranton, very popular name here in the state. His father was a governor running against McCormick in this state. Right now, let's take a look here. You have McCormick ahead by 119,000 votes compared to Bob Casey, 81% of the vote in. Let's go ahead and do that compare as well. Let's start with Scranton as well here. You could just see, let's go back here. You could see. Yeah, they're just starting in Scranton, though, just seeing how Harris is doing here. Bob Casey, 53%, Harris at 50. Let's see how it's doing statewide as well. Overall, Harris at 47, Casey at 47, Donald Trump 51, McCormick 49.
And so clearly Donald Trump at this point appears to be lifting Dave McCormick to a potential victory over Bob Casey. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves here tonight. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin looking to hold on to her seat. Where does that look at this hour?
Yeah, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin looking to hold on to her seat here. She's been in public office for 40 years at this point. Let's go over to the Senate so we can see how she's doing against Eric Hubdy. At this point, he is ahead by about 30,000 votes, 70% of the vote in. Let's go ahead and do that compare as well here so you can see how they're running against the top of the ticket. You have Hubdy, 49%, Donald Trump at 50. He's ahead again by 30,000 votes compared to Tammy Baldwin at 48, Vice President Kamala Harris at 47.
So again, we haven't called any of these races, but the portrait that you just showed is a big night for Republicans in all of these states. It looks like Tammy Baldwin's fighting to stay alive in the Senate right now. Bob Casey fighting for his life in the Senate. And in an open seat in Michigan, Mike Rogers is in the lead at this point. John Karl, this is potentially a big night for Donald Trump and all of the Republican Senate candidates who were looking either to fill an open seat or to replace a Democratic incumbent.
Look, it's not over. A lot of votes still to count, but the trend lines are clear. And what you are seeing is potentially Donald Trump on the precipice of the greatest comeback in American political history. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. We've seen presidents lose and come back. We remember Grover Cleveland coming back, but this is...
You do.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But
we weren't around for that. No, I'm just kidding.
But a president who left the White House the way he left, impeached for the second time, 7 members of his own party voting to convict him in the Senate, facing multiple criminal trials, indictments in 4 separate cases, convictions in the case in New York, and to face all of that, come back, recapture the Republican nomination, and be on the precipice of potentially getting back into the White House is something unlike anything we have ever seen in American history. Even with Donald Trump, we've just never seen something like this. And to see the Republicans in these races, we don't know where the House is yet. The House, we're probably gonna have to wait a while, but on the precipice of potentially not just retaking the Senate, but retaking it comfortably. It gets to the question that Donald Trump would ask in the closing days at the beginning of every one of his rallies. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And as we've seen in our polling, as we've seen in the exit polls today, the resounding answer from most Americans is no. They feel they've been hit with housing costs that have been, absolutely brutal. Inflation, the rate of inflation has gone down, but eggs are still about 161% more now than they were when Joe Biden got in. Gas prices about 50% more than when Joe Biden came into the White House. Americans are saying clearly, I mean, even before hearing the final results, we see, trend lines that they are unhappy with the stewardship of the Democrats in the White House, and this is a rejection.
And David, if I can, it really, just to double down on that, the message Kamala Harris has been trying to get out there is things are getting better. The inflation rate is going down. But the people who have suffered through this, they'll never get that money back. And voters I talked to, it was the absolute number one issue. And they felt that they were thriving under Donald Trump. There was a young voter in Texas, a veteran, who did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020, was disgusted by things that Donald Trump had said. His name is Carl Wild. And I checked in with Carl Wild again this week, and he said, my business has gone downhill. My wife's business has gone downhill. I am voting for Donald Trump. He said, I'm still disgusted by things he said, but this is about my family. This is about our suffering through the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, no matter the explanations about why or how that happened, that is what people are feeling. I've said it tonight before. That is their truth. They have blanked out some of the things Donald Trump has said. They've normalized some of the things Donald Trump has said, but it's their kitchen table.
And when you're paying more at the grocery store, you know
Exactly.
it. You know?
Exactly.
And so that's your most immediate concern. And as you said, as you traveled through the Sun Belt states, everywhere you went, that's what they said. I want to bring in the team at 538, Galen Druk, Elliot Morris. Do we have a camera at 538, guys? I wanted to ask them, I know they're crunching the numbers. There they are. See if we can find them in their cubicle back there. Hey, guys, are you back there? Are you still awake? Hey, I know you guys have been crunching the numbers here.
We got you, indeed. We are still awake.
Galen, Elliot, tell us what you're seeing in Pennsylvania at this hour. We're watching the Donald Trump lead grow. Is that something that Kamala Harris can catch up to mathematically at this point?
Yeah, I just want to lay out the math as it stands for 1 second. So here on this tool behind me, we're showing the probability of Harris or Donald Trump winning the presidency. If you consider all the projections ABC has made so far tonight, except for North Carolina, that first battleground state. But I want you to see when we assign North Carolina to Trump, for example, you see that shifts the likelihood of Trump winning the presidency to 76 out of 100 times. We also heard, of course, from the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, that he expects Trump to win Georgia. You know, we have not made that projection yet, but I just want to give you some sense of how the scenarios play out. If Georgia also ends up in Trump's column, we see that things there look quite good for him. Now, look, if Pennsylvania were in that case to then go to Kamala Harris, as you asked about, things suddenly do start to change a bit. We get closer back to 55 out of 100 scenarios Harris can win. But then Trump just needs to pick up any of these other battleground states in order to derail Harris on the path to 270. So right now, as you can see from our projections here, the scenarios that we are running, it looks quite good for Donald Trump at this point in the night. And my colleague Elliot, I think, can talk a little bit more about the outstanding vote in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, David, this might be thought of as a best case scenario for Kamala Harris at this point. One thing that this model you see here doesn't know about is the outstanding votes in Philadelphia. And what we've been seeing there and what Rick's been telling you on his great big board, looking at our benchmarks, is that Democrats just aren't hitting the turnout they need in Philadelphia. The collar counties around that city, they are going for Democrats about what Kamala Harris would need to win, but the turnout just isn't there in Philadelphia. Look, ABC News has not made any projections in these races, but from our perspective, it's just a matter of the counting.
Got it. All right. Elliot, Galen, thank you. It's an uphill climb at this point. It would seem mathematically for Kamala Harris to catch up to Donald Trump with this kind of lead in Pennsylvania, though the Harris campaign certainly isn't even acknowledging that. They've already said this is going to be a very long night or nights. I do want to call, should we call Virginia right now? ABC News can project Virginia. Mark, right? Let's move forward here. We'll project Virginia, 13 electoral votes going to Kamala Harris with 86% of the vote in. We do take note that this is later in the evening than we thought it would be to actually project Virginia, and it's 13 electoral votes for Kamala Harris, which does signal tonight, Rick Klein, what we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, to think about the fact that Harris is only going to win, well, we'll see what the final number is, but the fact that it took this long to get to it is significant. And it is worth noting right now, Donald Trump is up in all three states of the blue wall. Pennsylvania, it's a 200,000 vote margin. Michigan, it's about 100,000. And Wisconsin, it's 82,000. Now, we've also been saying throughout the night tonight and for the last couple of years that sometimes there's mirages on the map because the type of vote that's in and where it's from. And there is the possibility for this in all three states. And for similar reasons. It's because we have a large number of votes that are left in urban areas that tend to be bluer. So that's the story that we see right there. In Pennsylvania, it's Philadelphia. In Michigan, it's going to be Milwaukee. A lot of vote left, as Reince has been talking about. And that's in Wisconsin is Milwaukee. And in Michigan is Detroit. So lots of votes are still out there, but they would have to break in a very big way for Kamala Harris.
All right, Rick Klein at the big board. Thank you. We're going to drill down on Wayne County in Michigan, actually the Arab American population, and whether or not that could make a big difference here as well. Our coverage continues. We're going to stay on these three states. very close race in those 3 states between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, though Trump leads in all 3 at this hour. We're back in a moment with our ABC News live coverage.
Is in Atlanta. Steve, it's coming down to the wire.
That's right, Kira. Georgia hasn't been called. However, the Secretary of State here has already come out and said that it's mathematically impossible for Vice President Harris to win here. The Republicans are celebrating. The Democrats have already left their party for the night. Kira.
All right, Steve, thank you. I'm Kira Phillips. Stay with ABC News. We've got a lot more coverage straight ahead on Election Night 2024.
Luke Bryan, Peyton Manning, and Lainey Wilson host the CMA Awards live, ABC November 20th.
This town is full of stories.
Welcome to Spiderwick.
that I've been speaking to over the weeks, we've been talking about what the most consequential races are in the Senate. We've been discussing how this thing could play out and that it was likely that the Republicans might gain control of the Senate. But I think Rich, and we'll have him on in a moment here, I think
before we get to that, Austin, I just want to cut you off a little bit because I believe we're just seeing Amy Klobuchar at the microphone. Is of course she did take that, the incumbent Democrat there. We did see her just a little bit here live now from Fox. As you can see, she might be stepping away from the podium. So we're going to take you out to that in just a second. But Austin, let's get back to your comments because let's bring in Rich Rubino right now because Amy Klobuchar clearly wrapping up that speech. She did earn the title there in that Senate seat, retaining that seat over Roy Swine. Let's bring in Rich Rubino right now, political analyst. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Austin was breaking it down very great about the balance of power, what we're seeing right now. What do we make of the landscape on this election night, Rich?
Couple things. It's very competitive right now, and Republicans seems to be having an advantage. A state like Pennsylvania, I think that the thought process was that Senator Casey probably would eke out another term. He was elected in 2006. He actually defeated incumbent Rick Santorum, and then he was reelected in 2012, reelected in 2018. Now it looks like there's a possibility he may lose that seat. Ohio. That was a state that Sherrod Brown had to run ahead of the national ticket. He had to run ahead of Vice President Harris, and he had to distance himself from the party. In many respects, he tried to hug President on issues like President Trump, that is, and issues like trade. This is a state that the last two elections went 8 points for Donald Trump. This time around, it looks like he was not able to do that, and he apparently lost that race. Montana's an interesting race because Steve Daines is the chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee, campaign committee, and he is the other senator from Montana, and he's really made this kind of his flagship race, defeating his colleague from Montana, John Tester. It's a state that won about 16 points last time for Donald Trump, so he's really somewhat of a survivor, having been elected and reelected there.
And I'd like to remind the audience, why are we talking about this so much? Why is the balance of power in the Senate critical to how powerful a president we're talking about?
Well, in order for the president to get his legislation passed, it has to pass both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. There are other things presidents can do unilaterally. There are executive agreements he can negotiate with other countries, and he can certainly negotiate with other countries, and he can certainly sign executive orders. But for the most part, he needs the compliance of the House of Representatives of the United States Senate. And at some point in the United States Senate, there might be a movement by Donald Trump to try to get rid of the filibuster if they have all Republicans agreeing on that. The filibuster essentially makes it harder for legislation to get through because you need 60 votes really instead of 50.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that because you mentioned some of the things that could be in place if it is a Republican White House, but also a red House and Senate. How consequential could that be?
Very consequential. It could be very much that they're going to be butting heads. You'll have Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries from New York, center-left Democrat, taking on the Republican Majority Leader. It could be Rick Scott, who was just handily reelected tonight, the senator from Florida, or it could interestingly be John Thune. John Thune was a senator from South Dakota, and in 2004, he was elected against Tom Daschle. Tom Daschle was the incumbent Democrat, and Tom Daschle was at the time the Senate Majority Leader, and part of the message he had was that he could do more for South Dakota as a leader of the United States Senate than a freshman senator. Now we have a scenario where probably the front runner is John Thune, and John Thune himself could become the majority leader of the United States Senate. So one of those two, those are, of course, the case of John Thune is very much kind of an establishment Republican. It'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump is elected, how he will deal with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is obviously demonstrably popular with the conservative base and certainly with Republicans in South Dakota, but he really needs to get to use Congress in order to get any legislation passed. And it'll be interesting schism between the establishment Republican Party, Mitch McConnell and John Thune, and kind of the insurrectionist new right, if you will, of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
We're still awaiting some pertinent race calls in battleground states on the presidential race side. We'll get to that in a moment, Rich, but I just want to ask you in general, if history is any indicator, how long could it take before we know the balance of power in the lower chamber, the House?
It usually takes assuming it's a close race like this, it can take a long time because there are a lot of races that are going to be very close. The state of Maine, for example, they use instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. So they have one They have one congressional race in the 2nd District of Maine, which would be very competitive. That could take a while for them to count, but there are usually a couple of congressional districts that it can take 2-3 weeks to go until they finally have a winner of that race. If it's going to be very close. I think that obviously the races that are close, they're close for a reason, because they're usually in very competitive congressional districts. A lot of those are in upstate New York or in the suburbs of New York City, as well as many of them out in California as well. So my guess is are probably going to be about 10 seats that are probably going to take a while until we actually find out who the winner is going to be. And there's probably going to be 1 or 2 seats that we might not find out till January.
All right, it's going to be a while for that. Some of the states we've heard been called already. Some other ones are going to be taking quite some time. And one that might take quite some time is the Senate race in Pennsylvania. I want to put up this just as we continue to get votes in here. This one in Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick going against Bob Casey, a 3-term incumbent. We've already seen Sherrod Brown potentially lose his battle in Ohio to Bernie Moreno. What do we make of some of these flips? Because some of these guys have been in Congress for quite some time. Dave McCormick right now a 2-point lead. What do we make of this, Rich, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and also Montana with Jon Tester potentially losing? What do we make of some of these flips?
What we're making of it, I think, is that kind of Democrats who are
reliably blue. And the problem is Ohio and Florida are gone. For
Well, in the case
Democrats.
of North Carolina, it was baby blue in 2008 and not since.
It hasn't been since. So that's, I don't know what color it is. It's lavender. So yes, exactly. So I think one of the things that they will need to think about, regardless of the outcome, is where the states are that they're going to play. They would love to have Texas, of course. Texas didn't turn out for them to work out. Maybe it wouldn't for 8 years. But with states off the map, it's like, is it Georgia and North Carolina? Are there places they need to invest? That's one of the challenges
to Jen's
too, I think.
Point, I'm getting an increasing number of texts from Democratic sources who are looking at these returns come in, the fact that she's not meeting her benchmarks in these various counties where she needs to, who are really starting to take that reflective tone of Democrats and thinking about the next election cycle need to think about how to better meet voters where they are. Again, we still have a lot of vote to come in. We still have to see what happens with the blue wall. But the fact that this is such a fight for them, the fact that this is a tied race, it's also taking a step back, voters saying so far, at least, they like Trump.
Well, it's so interesting, too, because I remember in our earlier days in politics, after Republicans lost to Barack Obama, there was the famous autopsy commissioned by the head of the RNC that said and gave some tough love to Republicans, saying, listen, this country is changing demographically. And if you don't get a piece of that pie, you're going nowhere. Well, how interesting that we actually are seeing tonight Donald Trump getting more of the Latino vote. We'll see if he, got a better share of the black vote. I don't think we've seen that in the exit polls yet, but you're starting to see that.
Yeah, that is true. And I also, though, will say it wasn't a policy campaign. Right? There weren't policy proposals that were dueling. To me, it seems much more cultural, what you're seeing.
Well, isn't that the note for Democrats?
That is a harder thing to grapple with. That's my point. It takes a lot of deep soul searching. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. But if you look again to the breakdown, college versus non-college educated, rural versus urban, those are big cultural issues that are beyond whether somebody has an 81-page economic plan or whatever their other plan is. And that's a different
I disagree
conversation.
with you a little bit, Jen, on
All
that.
right,
I do think
level of disagreement. Go ahead.
I do think there was policy, but it was more around the record. So, I mean, Donald Trump was running as the incumbent president without being the incumbent president. He was running on his record, primarily prior to COVID, and reminding people, whether it was on the immigration, the economy. I mean, I remember when I was on the 2020 campaign prior to the pandemic, I think we were down for a Democrat debate in Atlanta, and an African-American gentleman came up to me and looked around, said, I like your guy because everybody's got work and our paychecks are going up. Now, COVID scrambled everything. But I think a lot of people, especially in those communities that are moving over, they're doing it based off of, well, I remember whether it was the border was secure, the economy was better, prices were lower under Donald Trump. So it was an incumbent campaign without being the incumbent.
With the benefit of 4 years, and
Yeah,
people do
that's
it.
right.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a revision. We don't have to argue about
No,
this now. There's other things to discuss, but it's a bit of a
We'll argue about it.
revisionist.
Well, yeah.
It is a revisionist. So to me, that still is a messaging cultural thing and not actually a policy debate.
Okay, I'll
that's
give you
what I
that
would
part of it.
lightly
Yeah.
dispute.
All right.
Okay.
Well, Garrett Haake is at Trump election night headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. How's it going there, Garrett?
Lester, there's sort of a barely contained sense that the party is really going to get started here at any moment at this Trump election headquarters. Every time a new result is announced on screen behind me, there are huge cheers from a crowd that has been filing in here, drinking beer, wine, and cocktails for some time now and is ready to celebrate. And I'll just say, anecdotally, it is a younger crowd. It is a younger crowd than other election nights I've covered, other Republican events that I've covered. And I think it reflects something that we've seen in the exit polls, this so-called shift of the bro vote in particular towards Donald Trump, the young men who he has put so central in this campaign. You know, I think about the fact that just today when he was voting, he was asked by another reporter about what he thought one of the most important moments of this campaign was. And he mentioned Joe Rogan, the podcaster, and the fact that he did that podcast interview and then subsequently got Rogan's endorsement, which he made a big part of his closing remarks just last night. Feels like a week ago now. Trump is talking to a different segment of America and has created a different electorate for Republicans than has existed in any other Republican race that I've covered. It's reflected in this room. I think we're seeing it reflected in the states he's putting together, just as you guys were just discussing about kind of what states are in play, what the map is going to look like now, and potentially for cycles in the future.
All right, Garrett, thank you. I want to go over to Peter Alexander, your counterpart over at Kamala Harris headquarters in Washington, D.C. So what is the mood there?
Well, you can hear the music blaring, but within the crowd right now, it's pretty silent. A lot of glum looks on the faces here over the course of this evening. They've been playing as the returns were coming in on one of the cable channels, and frankly, they weren't the returns that most of the people here in the room wanted. So you start hearing several dozen people start chanting, "Music, music." They muted the TV and blasted some music so they could sort of lift the spirits of some of the folks here this evening. I'll tell you, based on an attendee who was at one of the Harris events taking place at a hotel not far from here, the situation there, the scene was described as that of a funeral right now. Now, that doesn't mean this thing is over, but it does give you a sense of the way people are feeling right now. I was with Kamala Harris just yesterday as she was traveling through Pennsylvania at that late night event. Actually, it was just 24 hours ago that she was with Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, Oprah Winfrey, and she said to the tens of thousands gathered that momentum is on our side, but clearly there was a different message being communicated now in the form of that document that was obtained by NBC News, the statement sent by the campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, saying basically that we always knew this race was going to be tight, and increasingly it appears that they believe the blue wall states are their best path going forward at this time. That's what it seems to be the way this night is going to go for most folks here. It's not the end of the road. Jen O'Malley Dillon also saying we're going to keep at it tomorrow, but we wait to hear from Kamala Harris, of course, in the course of the next couple of hours. We'll let you know.
Jen, how important are notes like that? Not for our consumption, but for the consumption of the campaign.
Hugely important. I think people forget. I've been on winning presidential campaigns, and losing ones feels better when you win. Just state the obvious. But
I agree.
you know, there we go. We can agree. But you know, this is a team that has been, many of them through a massive transition just 107 days ago, where many of them signed up to work for somebody slightly different. And Joe Biden, you know, it's been. They've been working 20 hours a day. They've been eating bad pizza, drinking bad beer, all of the things, and it's just to keep them rolling,
But at a
keep
moment
them
like
going.
this, but a moment like this, now we know earlier in the evening they were trying to keep them in line and all this, but now you're at a point where you have no control.
You don't, but you need to keep the campaign team's spirits up, because they're continuing to talk to voters and counsel people who may have questions. And they're still a part of this big team that's been working to elect Kamala Harris. They don't have control, but the end has not happened yet. And so they need to keep them all, their spirits up. That's the goal.
You say the end hasn't happened yet. I mean, do you still hold out hope that there's a path? I mean, a reasonable path?
Well, look, I think it becomes, as I said earlier, more and more challenging as more results come in and you see that the blue wall looks like the primary possible path. And as you see her underperforming Biden in a number of these counties, that makes it more challenging. Now, there are still, if you talk to Democrats, which I have, They believe there are votes that are still coming in Philadelphia. There are still votes coming in cities. That's often how these nights go. So I'm a believer you got to wait until you know. That's what happens internally here as well. But yes, if you're on the campaign right now, you're feeling pretty down because there are places you wanted to have in your win column to give you more space and breathing room, and you don't have them in this moment.
As we talk about this idea of the Democratic brand, Jen, and as you've been having this conversation here, I just want to throw out a data point to the table here because there is a ballot initiative that has just passed in a state that enshrines a right to paid sick leave and a higher minimum wage, and it passed with 59% support. If I were to say that, maybe you'd say blue state probably, right?
California, right?
Missouri. Right? A state that we called almost right away for former President Trump here, which I think speaks to what you're getting at here, this idea of a realignment in this moment. You've talked about it. Chuck's talked about it. We've had that conversation here at the table.
I also think Hallie had the opportunity to interview Vice President Kamala Harris, and you asked her a fascinating question. Do you think the country is ready for a Black woman president? And she said yes. And depending on how this night goes, I think that will be one of the questions that gets asked.
This is the piece that, and again, we don't know what the outcome is yet. But I think when Hillary Clinton lost, a lot of people felt like, a lot of women, a lot of Democrats felt like there's never going to be a woman in my lifetime, right? And I think one of the things that is going to be a challenge if Harris loses is that there will be Democrats who will not want to take a risk on a woman, on someone who's diverse, because they'll think, I like that person, but the country's not ready. Here's the thing. The country's not ready until the country is ready with Barack Obama. Yeah. There's a range of factors that lead to the win or loss of anyone, and we don't know what's happened yet, that will all have to be delved into, but I do worry about that if she loses.
We do know it is something that she leaned out of in her campaign, unlike Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was not something, she didn't open her stump speeches with that idea. I mean, she talks about it, and she talked about it with me. She's talked about it with all of you here too, that it would be the president for all Americans, and that she is sort of putting her head down and grinding it out.
But her if she loses, it won't be because women didn't turn out. It won't be because of women, right? It won't be because she pulled back a lot of the Democratic base that had gone away and were double haters, as we called them for a long time, before there was a switch at the top of the ticket. And that is actually how Barack Obama also ran and won, which he didn't lead with the historic nature of his candidacy on his sleeve. There will be a lot of people who second guess that if she loses.
But if she loses, it may also be because there are tremendous headwinds in terms of an unpopular incumbent and people feeling terrible about the economy. And even if inflation is down to 2%, sometimes the stuff you feel, your gas prices, your groceries, it doesn't feel that way. So that may also be the rationale.
That's exactly my point I was trying to make earlier, and you just did it in a more articulate way, which is that, there will be there are always leaps to conclusion in both parties when your candidate loses, or if they lose. And again, we don't know yet, but, and people will leap to different ones, right? The country isn't ready for a woman. The country isn't ready for a Black woman, all of these things. But there are a lot of factors that play into the win or a loss. And I think if she loses, I'm hopeful people will look at the broad scope of where the country is, the cultural divides, the rural-urban divides.
The education divides.
The education divides. There are just a lot of factors at play in presidential races.
I'll give you something that may be positive for you going forward. Should this all end the way we were talking, that's a possibility. You still have a very young, good bench in Governor Shapiro, the governor of North Carolina, the Gretchen Whitmer, who could possibly bridge that gap. And as opposed to saddling them with the L, if they would have joined the ticket with the vice president, or if they had replaced the vice president and become the nominee with 100 and some days out in a very difficult situation, I think you would have been weaker as a party for it.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think that if she loses and Donald Trump wins, there will be millions of people in this country who voted for her who will feel like we're in the state of an emergency. And I think that is how people will respond and feel. And they will be looking for hope, a resistance, an opposition. And there are a lot of people in the Democratic bench. You mentioned some of them were in the beefsteaks we all lived through this summer. Some of them were not, who I would expect would all be out there on everybody's shows in the coming days.
Well, and that's what makes the timing, I think, of President Biden's decision to step down after the debate something that, if she does in fact lose, will be under a microscope, because of course there was so much discussion even over the summer about potentially having an open primary and having that fight play out within the Democratic Party. So I think it's one of the big questions moving forward.
And you mentioned debate. We haven't really talked about that. There was no second debate. And, and you
That's
have to
right.
wonder how that affected the trajectory of this race, because by most accounts, he didn't perform well in his first debate with Harris.
True. And I also think that it throws into question a lot of things. I mean, I think anybody who watched that debate objectively felt she outperformed him in that debate. If she doesn't win, yes, there should have been a second debate, but do debates matter? They should matter. They're the public being able to see the candidates. She has a far superior ground operation that has been invested in across the country. The Republican state parties, you can disagree with me here, of course, are falling apart in many states in the country. That will throw into question, does that matter? It should matter, but it will throw that into question. So yes, not a second debate, not an opportunity for people to see them person to person. The first one definitely benefited her, but if she doesn't win, it didn't benefit her enough to put her in the White House.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. We're still waiting on a lot of numbers from the battleground states and the road to 270. We'll be right back after this break.
Whenever heartburn strikes, get fast relief with Tums. It's time to love food back. Also, try new Tums Gummy Bites.
I would highly recommend Jobber to any home service entrepreneur that's out there. The problem I had before Jobber was spending way too many hours in the office. Once I did the 14-day trial, I figured out very quickly that it would simplify my life. Jobber had